Good morning, everyone. We're here to, everyone's in a good mood, that's good. We're here to consider House Bill 109, just for those who may be unfamiliar with the process. This is a hearing, and it's a hearing only. We're in the off-session time. It's not the rush of the session, so we can take a little bit of time and more than we would during the session, and pay attention to some issues very closely. Candidly, I'll tell you, Representative Bryant asked for this hearing during the session because of some other priorities that occurred during the session. We were not able to do so, and I regret that. That being said, by and large, if a member asks for a hearing on a bill, that member will be granted a hearing. It's just a function of scheduling. And so if we could not get it done during the session, and we did not, because of other pressing priorities, then we certainly will get it done during the off session, and that brings, and hence the hearing today. Just a couple of before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping matters, scheduling matters, really, for members of the committee. You know that we've got a meeting on December 3rd on Representative Bearden's House Bill 615, having to do with firearms, possession, carrying, and so forth. I anticipate that there'll be a substitute that Representative Bearden, a draft substitute that he'll come up with prior to that hearing to be circulated to members so that members can take a look at that in preparation for that hearing. And we'll be working off that substitute, assuming that it's produced, and I think it will be. We'll also more than likely have a meeting at some point around that same time. I just don't know when. The Georgia Retail Association has asked for us to come to a program that they're going to put together regarding the increased amount of theft-related crime, specifically what they call smash and grab crime that's been going on, and some of the drug-related aspects that go along with that, and specifically the use of juveniles on the part of gangs to go ahead and carry out those crimes. So I anticipate that being scheduled around the same time. I'd also anticipate a substitute is being drafted right now, or at least conceptually it is, on Representative Ralston's House Bill 571. That is the conventionally known as the sex offender cleanup. There are 3 court decisions, Supreme Court decisions, that we've got to address in terms of making amendments to current law. There are also some other proposed changes that will probably be made as a result of litigation that's pending right now, that has not come to closure yet, but we anticipate that it will, or probably will, and we'd do well to clean up some potential issues in those areas prior to the session. There's also the possibility we may get into some other areas that have been recommended to us by the Sex Offender Review Board, otherwise known as SORB, as it relates to our current law involving the Sex Offender Registry. Look for that meeting to occur around that same time in early December. We're not going to get too far into December, obviously, because of the Christmas holiday. I would anticipate, depending on what substitutes are ready and when, and the timing and logistics of that we'll probably have a fairly full hearing schedule the week before we go into session so that we can be ready to tee up a fair number of bills the first week, including those bills that I've just mentioned, including some other bills that we talked about in June, recall, that are on the less controversial side. It's the chair's intent to go ahead and schedule those as soon as humanly possible the first week of the session, have them voted on, marked up, amended, and out the door so that we can inevitably address the bills that will be coming in during the 2010 session. We want to give those bills as much chance for passage as we humanly can, and it's just a matter, again, of scheduling. So sorry to go on, but look for those. There's also Representative Parsons' Crime Victims Bill of Rights. There's a substitute being drafted on that right now. We may have a hearing again in early December or in early January on that particular substitute, with the hope of acting on that sooner rather than later. So with that, sorry to go on, but I want to give members sort of a snapshot of the next 2 months so they can be prepared to act at the appropriate time. So with that, Representative Bryant, what I'm going to ask you to do is to obviously talk about House Bill 109, the general intent behind it, your motivations for introducing it, To the extent that you would want to go ahead and go through individual sections, that's fine. It's a brief bill. It's fairly straightforward, as we discussed. It obviously has a certain amount of controversy attached to it. We get a lot of those types of bills in this room, so we're used to it. And then I anticipate that members will go ahead and have specific questions about specific aspects of the bill, and we'll just march on from there. So take what time that you need. I will tell folks in the audience who are signed up to testify, we're probably going to, in respect to Representative Bryant's schedule, has got to get back to the Savannah area. We're going to look to go ahead and conclude by around noon. Around is a very general, undefined term. I understand that. But we're going to try to get done around noon so that Representative Bryant can get back home in a timely manner. So we're probably going to go ahead and limit testimony to probably around 5 minutes per person that's signed up. I think that should be adequate time to get the point across, whatever that point is. I would ask, though it's not a demand and it's not an edict, if you've heard testimony that essentially summarizes your testimony pretty well, I would ask that you reconsider testifying if your testimony will simply be to the effect of me too, or I agree. That being said, and it's a longstanding policy in this room that if you want to be heard, you will be heard. There's just no doubt about that, and that's a promise. We may have to limit that time, obviously, as I said, but you will be heard if you want to be heard. But I just ask you to use your judgment according to what other testimony you've already heard and the lines of questioning that you've heard from individual members. May cure a problem, may cure an issue that you would otherwise want to bring up. Representative Bryant, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say a very special good morning to all of you. And I do welcome the opportunity to be here today to present this bill. I might add initially that this is not something that I dreamt up. This was brought to me by law enforcement as well as Humane Society people, and I agree. So with that agreement, I am willing to carry this bill. I would like to say that House Bill 109, this bill curtails individuals from participating in cockfighting by imposing both monetary and imprisonment penalties. The bill also provides for individuals that own, possess, train, transport, and sell any cock with the intent that such cock shall be engaged in fighting with another shall constitute a felony. Law enforcement agencies throughout the state, in particular Garden City Police Department, have their hands full in dealing with suspected cockfighting operations. While actually participating in cockfighting in Georgia, we know that it's a felony. Possessing birds for fighting and being a spectator at cockfighting is completely legal. There's no reason to allow anyone to raise birds with the intent to fight, as there are no states where cockfighting is legal. Foreign import and interstate transport of fighting animals is a federal felony. And I understand states that's going to try to ban this particular issue this year naturally is Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Arizona. We all know that cockfighting is a cruel and inhumane proposition. It's the same as dog fighting or any other type of animal fighting. This bill is to amend by adding a new code section to read as follows. As used in this code section, the term cock means any male chicken, including game fowl, provided, however, that such term shall not include wildlife as defined in Code Section 27-1-2. Any person who knowingly owns, possesses, keep, or train any cock, with the intent that such cock shall engage in an exposition of fighting with another cock for amusement or gain, causes any cock to fight with another cock, or cause any cock to injure or injure each other. Permits any act in violation of paragraph 1 or 2 of this subsection to be done in any premises under his or her charge of control. Should be guilty, I should say, of a felony, and upon the first conviction thereof shall be punished by imprisonment or not less than 1 nor more than 5 years, a fine of not less than 5,000, or both such fines and imprisonment. On the second or subsequent conviction, well, I guess I should end it there, but for the brevity of time, as the chairman mentioned, the bill is a straightforward bill, and the intent here is to provide stricter controls on cockfighting in the state of Georgia. Not just fighting, but preparation of cock for the purpose of fighting. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to set to the side here and hear comments from those that's for or those that's against.
Members may have some questions of you, Mr. Bryant, regarding the actual wording in legislation.
Okay.
I've got a question or two. I'll kick it off just about a couple of concerns, structural concerns that I may have, that I'm certainly willing to be educated otherwise about. The first one, in no particular order, looking in Section 1, D on page 2, line 35, any person who is knowingly present at any place or building where preparations are being made for an exhibition of the fighting of cocks is guilty of a misdemeanor. Part of what we do here is we come up with these scenarios about, well, what if this and what if that? And really what that allows us to do is to get to the root of the intent of a bill, and sometimes a bill can go ahead and cast such a wide net that it ends up catching conduct that really is probably not contemplated by the author or by proponents in general. I mean, if you've got someone knowingly present at any place or building where preparations are being made, the first example that I came up with in my mind was, well, what if somebody's doing this in their attic? They're, preparing for this type of match in their attic, for this type of conduct, I should say, in their attic, and they're downstairs. Somebody walks in. Well, there's preparations being made up in the attic, but they happen to walk in the house, not having the first clue of what's going on in the attic, where preparations are being made. You have to wonder, well, what do preparations mean? There are a lot of terms that really need to be defined, and one of the concerns I think we all have on both sides of the aisle in general is that we don't want to catch conduct that's not meant to be punished. So, I mean, what about the situation where you've got a house where this is occurring, because that's a place or a building where preparations are being made up in the attic? What if the postman comes in to deliver a package and he's in the building at that time? Is that person, talk about that possibility.
Okay.
Well, is there any number of them that I can think of, and I guarantee members can too.
And I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, and that's why the word intent is there. I could assure you that situation that you just alluded to could happen, but the intent factor would be the deciding factor, whether a person intent is to raise, prepare, or to use for the purpose of cockfighting. And using the postman, just by virtue of delivering mail, I don't think will fit the intent portion.
I would agree with you, but then I look at the wording and it says any person who is knowingly present. Well, that person's knowingly present in the room, and we have to look at these statutes and we have to construe them in terms of their plain meaning. We operate under the plain meaning rule here because English is English, and you don't have to be a lawyer to know that. I'm the first one to say that.
And I'll be the first one to agree with you that the wording intent should make sure the wording intent is placed there and understood by the simplest means.
Okay. Mr. Everson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had some concerns in regards to that. You alluded to Representative Bright. Good to see you, my good friend. And line 18 here, and it goes back to the term intent, and I understand these learned attorneys in here. Maybe you all can help me. The term intent is currently defined in code. Would that be applicable to this same legislation as it's currently defined in code? Because to me that's going to be, as it's written here, to me that's going to be a matter of interpretation as far as intent. How do you prove intent? How do you, I'm just asking from a layman's perspective, point of the author,
to me,
anyone.
Mr. Bryan, do you want to address,
How do you
address your
prove
bill?
intent?
Or, I mean, it seems to me that would be a question for the jury, but if you want to go ahead and answer that.
Well, intent will, again, that's just as any other bill like this bill. We're talking about growing marijuana in your house. And postman deliver meals to your house, and all of a sudden the agencies bust in and discover the marijuana being grown in your house. The intent factor would play there just like it would play here. I'm not saying intent would be an easy thing to prove, but I believe that we can spell that out where it would be understandable and explainable.
So you're under the opinion that the current term intent, as it's currently defined in current codes, addressing all criminal activities or all crimes, will apply to this legislation here as well?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Bryant, to follow up not necessarily on that particular point, but on line 23 about charge and control. Permits any action in violation of 1 or 2 of the subsection to be done on any premises under his charge or control. How would one define that?
Well, we can use Michael Vick, the facility that he owned in Virginia. It was his facility. He was not there when they busted. He was not there when they did it, but it was his property. So that's the way I would analyze this.
Well, I mean, that goes back to the issue of knowingly. I mean, and the question is, what is knowing and what is knowing under those let me just finish the question. Okay. I mean, it's one thing to own something. It's another thing to have knowledge of something as well. Now, is it your intent to have legislation so if you own property, even though you may be on the other side of the country, but you're not aware of it, that you're still guilty?
I believe, Mr. Chairman, this is where I would have to rely on your committee expertise to help me define this in this bill. In other words, not just put this out there without good enough explanation to cover somebody that's unintentionally become involved. Okay.
The other thing, just a concern that I would raise, and that is that on line 30, any person who is present at an exhibition, and that really goes to the policy ramifications of somebody who they're present. Well, what if it's someone who stumbles in there, who's has no intent of being of going to that particular type of event, maybe a completely innocent person, they're walking in the door of something that they don't know anything is about, but at that moment they're present. At that moment they're present, and that goes back to a point that I made before. It's the type of thing that can be language certainly can be worked on and looked at, but the concern that I have in general about this particular bill as written is the breadth of it, that it is very expansive, and that it contemplates scenarios whereby an otherwise innocent person walks into the wrong room, literally, and they are present. And by virtue of their presence at that moment, and I mean a moment, a split second in time, they're guilty of a crime. Mm-hmm. And that in general concerns me. I'm not saying that can't be cured, but I think in legislation such as this, we do ourselves well to be very careful about the breadth of that kind of scope, that kind of legislation. So, just a statement.
No, but I agree with you, okay. And I do feel that matters such as this needs to be corrected, and I'm willing to make sure that happens.
Thank you. Mr. Knox. Did you have no? No, sir. Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to piggyback off what you were referring as just these scenarios that are not intentional, but maybe just, and the one thing I feared my 5 years being up here, unintended consequences. And if you'd just humor with me, and this is a personal story, and I hope people don't think less of me for what I did when I was young, but, you know, I grew up in a rural area, and, you know, when we'd get out for summertime, we didn't have much to do. There was no cable TV, and my grandmother had her chicken yard, and her sister, who lived about 75 yards away, had her chicken yard, and there was a cock and a rooster in each one of them, and they're naturally mean. And my three cousins and I would do all we could do to lure those close enough to watch and have fun. Now, I'm sure in a controlled setting of fighting, they use tools where death is usually but these two particular roosters would humor us all summer long with their natural born intentions to fight, and they're naturally born to do that. Now, under this bill, if we had a neighbor that didn't like my granny and she saw these boys doing it every day and called the law, not only would I be convicted, she would be too, because under 22, she's permitting it to be done under her charge or control. Now, I know that's an unusual circumstance, but what if?
Let me say that the situation you described growing up was identical to mine. I had them in my yard too, and we did some of the same things that you mentioned. I honestly believe that the situation that you mentioned and what's in this bill is completely opposite. I don't feel that your situation could be misconstrued with what's in this bill.
I agree to a certain standpoint, but we all know in small towns, personalities and politics, and you know, can blur the lines between amusement and another. And I just want to bring that up because that was kind of somewhat the chairman was talking about, and also 18 and 19, line 18, 19. Who is going to determine what training is? Is that a law enforcement officer? I mean, who would be on the spot to say, well, these birds are being kept for training purposes to fight, or between these birds are being kept for a hobby or of a game fowl breeder who enjoys the birds? I mean, who would make that determination?
I think like most things like this you would have, let's use the manual for an example. There is and should be policies to explain what this is. Not just, and I'm talking about statewide, just it should be a manual, it should be ordinances to show exactly who falls in this category.
Now, there is manuals in place, or we should have those put?
I don't know it that they are, but it should be, yes.
Now, whose responsibility would that be to contrive that manual? I
believe whatever department this bill comes under for the state should have that responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
Mr. Ramsey. Mr. Collins.
I want to follow up just on that last little exchange. This would not only fall under the state agency, it'd fall under every local police. So are we giving an open-ended thing here to where each police department can determine for themselves?
No, I believe my statement was utilizing the state responsibility that has responsibility over this bill, whatever agency or department that is at the state level. Okay. I think it should be the same throughout the state, not individual cities.
Okay, I understand sort of where you're going there. I also understand the real-world sort of application here. We're passing what's on the paper, and the law will simply say trains. And if that's never defined by who in this vast arena of state patrol, GBI, whoever. I understand the intent of your bill, and I'm not at. That bothers me, though, in the sense that I know a lot of times you're not going to get a definitive statement for a lot of reasons from a state agency, in which the bill doesn't designate a state agency to do. So the state agencies are going to say, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough time, we're not going to do this. So in essence, it'll leave it back to every municipality, every city police department, every county police department, every sheriff, everybody else, in essence, to make their determination here. I understand where you're going there, but that statement's way too broad, it seems like, to just say, here's what we're thinking here. I think maybe it's something you may even can craft into the bill. If you say trains includes that they have, paraphernalia on the premise, those kind of things like that. I mean, that's an issue, but just to simply say trains, I could go back and claim that what Representative Cole and you both attested to earlier in your and a great youth growing up, and which I had as well, is could be considered training. Mm-hmm. So I just add that as a caution, Mr. Chairman.
And I agree with excuse me. I agree with you. I believe that can be crafted within the bill. Yes.
Mr. Mangum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you for your bill, my colleague, Representative Bryant. Mr. Chairman, you asked my question primarily, but I want to follow up on it very slightly to emphasize it. I am concerned about the unintended consequences, as has been stated, when we dealt with the dog bill, if you recall. And some of us have friends, and friends will take us places, and under the law, we will be unintentionally, but intentionally found guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I think that should be tailored to capture the persons that you are trying to capture. My second part, quite frankly, is because I'm not familiar with the history of this bill, I'm trying to get the history that has not been said, or it may have been said and I missed it. And that is, what precipitated, what incident, or was it a local incident? I do notice that all the representatives are from the same general area. I looked down the list, and it's 59, 60, 61, 62. I mean, they're all in the same general area. I'm from Middle Georgia originally, and I haven't heard of it being a real big issue, but is it a real, was there some incident that brought this? Was there some big something in your area?
No,
I'm just trying to, because it's all seemingly in your general area. All these representatives are sponsoring this bill from the same general area. What happened, if anything, or why is it so regionally? It's not, because this is a bill that will impact all of Georgia.
And I believe this problem exists in all of Georgia, primarily, and I would suggest that probably more northern Georgia, middle Georgia than South Georgia, where I live. I know last year I read in the local newspapers where fighting rings was busted, and in some cases you had elected officials involved and arrested that were not in lower Georgia. They were up around North Georgia. So I think this exists throughout the state of Georgia, and it has to be an area. Let's admit it's not going to happen in Atlanta, in the city of Atlanta. It's going to be on the outskirts. It's going to be in areas where they could conceal what goes on.
There was nothing that happened in your neck of the woods, quote unquote.
Well, let me say this. My police chief from area did initially bring this to me, and he had a problem with cocks being raised for the purpose of fighting. And his hands was tied primarily because there's nothing he could do. And you're talking about 100, 150 chickens being raised for the purpose of resale, for the purpose of fighting. And I do believe anybody raising 100 or more chickens for the purpose, fighting chickens, I would say, cocks, it's not, to put on your shoulder and say this was your pet.
Mr. Franklin.
Thank you. You had mentioned the idea of it's going to be in the outlying areas. I know where I am in Cobb. I doubt we would have this, since you have to have at least 2 acres in Cobb County to be able to even have one chicken. So I don't see this as a problem, at least in my county.
Do you know of any instances where someone might steal someone's rooster to use it in fighting?
Nothing is impossible, but I don't know of an instance, no.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. As I was reading the bill, I was reminded of what our founding fathers unanimously declared in 1776 when they said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men." So basically what they were declaring was that they were acknowledging that there is a God to whom we're accountable, which I think is important as we look at this piece of legislation, that our rights come from Him, they're not privileges granted by the civil government, and that the sole purpose of the civil government is to secure, protect, and defend those God-given rights to life, liberty, and property. And looking at this piece of legislation, I'm wondering how someone's God-given right to life, liberty, or property is being infringed by someone else. And maybe you could enlighten me, because I was not able to see it.
Well, let me say this. I believe I could agree with your analogy there. However, this country of ours is made by laws. I mean, we have laws to govern everything that we do, and a lot of them I do not agree with. So I can understand any member here not agreeing with what I'm doing, trying to do. But we're governed by laws, and the democratic society say the majority rules. So whatever the majority decide here, and then I have to live with. And if it's to make this a law that's governed by the state, and then I'm ready to abide by that. If it's defeated, and then I'm ready to abide by that. But we're controlled by laws.
Right, but my question was, where is someone's God-given right to life, liberty, or property being infringed that would cause you to want to bring this bill forward to have the state actually take action, since that's really the state's function, is to punish those who infringe on another's inalienable God-given right to life, liberty, or property?
I guess we could attach this to the criminal aspect of it, drugs. And drugs create serious crimes such as murder, making money from an operation such as this and not paying taxes for it.
We already have. That was how they got what some of the Al Capones and whatnot was for tax evasion, not for bootlegging or whatnot. But we're talking about the bill itself, and I still would like to figure out what right is being violated that we need to address with a new felony.
The right.
I'll need to move to Mr. Levitas after Representative Bryant's response.
Excuse me. I am an animal lover, and I have pets at home. And I think if someone used my pets to fight for the purpose of it, then I think that's infringing on my rights. And I apply the same thing to these chickens. When I was a kid growing up, as mentioned, we had them all over my place. I mean, we had them yards full of them.
No, they were using your
I mean,
your
we
pet.
can't have this as a running dialogue. I mean, I think we both know where y'all are, and I know where you are. Representative Bryant knows where you are, and you know where he is. And I think you're all just on different pages as to the underlying foundation as to why he's brought the bill. Not editorializing on that, but I think you have two different views on it. I think we've established that. Okay? Is that fair?
I wasn't quite finished, but I have to defer to you.
Well, no, you don't. But if you have one more follow-up, we can certainly do that. But I think we've said the same thing about 3 times now. But the gentleman has one other question. Fire away.
If I could reserve that till after everyone else, in case there's something I need clarification.
Sounds fine. Ms. Travis, did you have something?
I was just going to point out that the dogfighting statute might have some language in it that, like, instead of control, it uses ownership or control, and there's some other language in there that if in revising this, you might want to take a look at.
Thank you.
The 123 charge of control, and the dogfighting uses ownership or control. And
You're saying there's language in the dogfighting statute that could have applicability to this particular bill if it were to go forward?
yes,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned on line 30 about being present, and for example, the dogfighting statute does speak to that, but says is knowingly present.
Okay. Representative Bryant, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me call John Goodwin from the Humane Society. Mr. Goodwin, pursuant to my comment earlier, we're going to limit you to 5 minutes just in the interest of time and the extent of the witness list as it is right now anyway. And then we'll open it up for questions, but we would ask you to be as brief as possible.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for
Thank
having this hearing today on House Bill 109. As the chairman mentioned, my name is John Goodwin. I'm the manager of animal fighting issues at the Humane Society of the United States. On behalf of our 191,931 members in the state of Georgia, I come here in strong support of House Bill 109. I also believe I can answer a lot of these questions about that were asked about this bill. This legislation, in addition to being endorsed by us, is endorsed by the Georgia Sheriff's Association, the Georgia Police Chiefs Association, and other agencies around the state. In fact, in the blue folders that we had distributed to you all, there's a sheet that lists endorsing agencies in it in the back. The opposition appears to come solely from cockfighting enthusiasts, people that are involved in something that is a crime in the state of Georgia, as well as all 50 states in our great union. Now, cockfighting is a cruel and barbaric activity. I've been along on these cockfighting raids. I've seen the carnage that's left behind. They put knives on their heels, or they put these ice pick-like instruments called gaffs on their heels, and they slice each other to pieces. I picked up birds with my own two hands that were still alive, but had their intestines hanging out from injuries that were inflicted on them in these organized cockfights. Now, this is something that exists solely for someone's idea of entertainment and gambling. There's no socially redeemable value whatsoever. House Bill 109 would close some important loopholes in Georgia's animal cruelty statute that make the law deficient in terms of prosecuting cockfighting. It's very similar to the dogfighting law that was passed by this General Assembly last year. The difference here with the intent of that dogfighting law and the intent of this law is simply the species in question. Cockfighting is widespread in Georgia. We've documented raids as far north as Whitfield County, as far south as Mitchell County. In fact, a cockfighting trade group called the United Gamefowl Breeders Association did a little study in 2003. They estimated there were 3,375 people in this state raising fighting cocks, even though it's illegal in Georgia, and even though shipping them to other localities where it may be legal is a federal felony. In short, there's no legitimate reason for raising birds with the intent to fight here in Georgia, because you can't do it here and you can't ship them elsewhere because of federal statute. For that reason, 37 states have enacted laws similar to what House Bill 109 proposes to prohibit the possession of rooster with intent to fight, the training, possessing, owning, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this you're going to hear some people probably testify because we hear the cockfighters around the country say, well, hold on a second. We just show our birds. This is going to affect poultry shows. Well, I want to point out that in no line in this bill does it affect showing. The dogfighters tried to make the same argument against the bill last year, and I haven't seen any dog shows around the state of Georgia rated by GBI. This would also go towards the spectators. We have had cockfighting raids where everyone says, those aren't my birds, I'm just a spectator. And they use that as a loophole to avoid prosecution. Now, I should point out that these cockfighting pits, these are in isolated areas where people generally pay an admission fee. Because cockfighting can be prosecuted as a felony in the state of Georgia, they go to great precautions to put these in areas off the beaten path. The people that are attending these cockfights know they're attending cockfights. They're not just stumbling into a backyard barbecue in North Georgia and there just happens to be a big pit set up with a bunch of game fowl getting healed up and ready to fight. I mean, these take place in large venues that you'd be surprised if you saw them. Sometimes they have concession stands. They have bleacher seating. When I say they have concession stands, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you eat at them because they're not the most sanitary places, but they do serve food. Also, the spectators help finance these criminal operations because they usually require an admission fee to get in the door. So the spectator provision of this bill I think is important both for removing a loophole that people use to avoid prosecution and also for making it more difficult for them to finance these illegal activities. Now, cockfighting, in addition to being a severe form of animal cruelty, carries with it a lot of other problems. The Drug Enforcement Agency, our DEA, put out a press release on December 30th of last year where they said that the cockfighting pits throughout central Tennessee had the Mexican Gulf Cartel, a narcotics trafficking organization, running drugs through them. And some members of the Game Fowl Breeders Association up there got ensnared in that investigation. Central Tennessee is just a hop, skip, and a jump from Georgia. And we've got our own federal government, our own drug enforcement agency saying that these cockfighting pits were tied in with the Gulf Cartel. So I believe that there are many good and compelling reasons for enacting House Bill 109 in some form that has the teeth to establish the intent behind the law. Members Committee, the passage of the case for passage of House Bill 109 is strong, and when it does come time to be voted on, I encourage a yes vote. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has about this legislation and cockfighting in general.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Questions from Mr. Goodwin? Mr. Knox.
You mentioned the cruelty to animals statutes in Georgia.
Yes,
what is it about that statute that we can't use to enforce the problem with cockfighting? Why do we need the cockfighting in addition to that is what I'm getting at.
Well, right now, let's say there's a cockfighting pit in a large derby and there's 300 people present. Law enforcement goes in and, there's, let's say 100 of them brought birds to fight in the derby. Well, when the police go in, 2 cockfighters are going to be in the pit along with the referee. So they can catch those 2 guys in the act. But the other 98 guys that bring those birds to our hypothetical derby can easily say, I was just here as a spectator. All the other birds are abandoned, so that therefore you can't tie them into the fight, and they use it as a loophole to escape prosecution.
Should you be able to prosecute somebody who is, let's say someone is there, but they're not an active participant? Now, I realize that warrants a definition as well. What if someone's coming in there and they are a spectator, but they're not a participant? And I think you know what I mean by that.
Oh, absolutely.
What is that person? Should that person be charged with a crime, in your opinion?
Absolutely.
Why
I
is
believe
that?
They should be charged with a misdemeanor.
What is it
crime.
they're actually doing to make them be punished?
Basically, these are gambling houses. The reason people...
Well, now, what if they're... No, that's not my question. I didn't say anything about gambling. I'm saying, what if they're just physically there? What if they're not doing anything? What if they're not an active participant, depending on that definition? But I think we both know what I mean by that.
Right, yeah.
What if they're just physically there? Is it your position that someone who is physically there, doing nothing other than breathing air, that they should be criminally punished under the criminal laws of the state?
I think that any law-abiding citizen has the good sense to avoid going into one of these cockfighting pits when everyone knows it's illegal. The reason that people are present is either because they're participants or they're there to wager on the fights.
We get paid the big money here, all $17,000 a year, to think about the what-if scenarios.
Well,
And Representative Knox, I apologize, but I thought this was I'll certainly turn it back to you in a second. But we get paid the big money to go ahead and think of the what-if scenarios that are not contemplated by your comments right there. And what about the situation where you don't have someone who's gambling? You don't have an active participant. You have somebody who's just physically there watching, whether it's just some sort of curiosity that you can characterize any way you want to, but they're just doing nothing other than existing in that particular space at that particular moment.
Well, first, sir, you make me feel better about my salary.
Not much, I take it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
But so appreciate that. But
You're free to come across if you like.
but second,
but it's a serious question because
Yes, I understand, sir.
and we could be talking about anything. We happen to be talking about something having to do with animals,
Right.
But we could be talking about any type of conduct on the part of any human being in this state. So the fact that we're talking about cockfighting or anything else really is irrelevant. We're talking about the concept of criminal punishment, of punishment
Yes,
under the criminal laws of the state by virtue of mere presence.
and we could use an analogy of an illegal casino. If GBI were to raid an illegal casino, I believe that every person in there would be charged with the crime for being at the illegal casino. Cockfighting is just like an illegal casino, except instead of having slot machines and card tables, they have birds fitted with knives that are fighting to the death. And so I would point to that analogy. I believe that this is a criminal industry where we've reached a social consensus. It's illegal in all 50 states. It's a felony in 39. And I do not see any logic or legitimate reason to leave any loopholes open for this industry to continue to exist. And so, if people are going to cockfights, this is an illegal activity. They just have the good sense to avoid that. And if they don't, then they can deal with being the consequences.
Let me turn over Mr. Knox.
Let me
apologize for jumping in that like that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Is it your idea that this bill would only make that crime applicable to a person who's paid an admission to get into this?
No, sir, that is not my intent. However, in New York State, the statute is enhanced if they can prove that an admission fee was paid. However, I believe that's a difficult burden for a prosecutor to make, to prove who paid. And, like, for example, if I go to a bar on a Saturday night and it's a bar that has a door fee, if I know the guy at the door, I might get in without paying an admission fee. So it's difficult to prove who in there paid admission fees and who did not.
This may be the question for, if I can, one more question, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman. This may be a question for counsel. We passed the dogfighting bill, didn't we? We have one in force.
2008.
Yeah, and this is basically tracking that bill, isn't it, or is it?
It's somewhat tracking it. Yeah, there's some pieces of it that are similar, and then there's some wording that's a little different. But it's right in line. Like it's numbered. Dogfighting is 16-12-37, and this is 16-12-39.
I think that's all I have. Thank you, Mr.
All right.
Chairman.
Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for your testimony. I'm still trying to get my hands around. I mean, you're stating the obvious.
Yes, sir.
That if we're going to rate a baseball game, we go down to Fulton County Stadium, they're playing, we know they're playing baseball. If we walk in on a cockfight, we know they're fighting cocks. My problem is with keeping, training.
Oh, yeah.
Who's going to decide, and I got two questions. Who's going to decide if you ride up in somebody's yard in rural Georgia, let's say Glasscock County,
Right.
and let's say I was a cockfighter and I kicked the habit, and I had a come to Jesus, but I kept the chickens.
Yeah. Well, the burden of proof, of course, falls on law enforcement and the prosecutor's office. Now, you ask the question, how do you establish that someone is training a bird with intent to fight, that they own these birds with intent to fight, they possess the birds with intent to fight? Well, that goes to a criminal investigation, and what an investigation ends up showing. We've had criminal investigations where people sold roosters to someone with the intent to fight, and they made it clear through the audio that was recorded. We've had investigations where probable cause was established for a search warrant, and paraphernalia and equipment, injectable drugs, these knives have no purpose other than being used in cockfights was present, and that helped establish cause. So the burden is not on the defendant or a person being investigated. The burden falls entirely upon the prosecutor's office to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this person is guilty of this particular statute if it's enacted.
And my second question is, you had mentioned earlier that you had been on raids, and this is out of curiosity, with, is that right?
Yes, sir.
When you confiscate the birds at a fight, what are done with them after they're confiscated?
It depends. Sometimes they are able to go to sanctuaries. Sometimes they're euthanized. It depends on what the availability is of places that are good homes for them to go to. But I can tell you this. We had a raid in Middle Tennessee in May 15th of this year, and the USDA was on hand, and the USDA seized the birds and they euthanized them. But I saw how they euthanized the birds, and it was quick and painless. I also saw two birds that had been cut open. They were dead, laying underneath someone's trailer, and one of them's intestines were hanging up out and tangled around his opponent's feet. I can tell you which way I'd rather go.
But going back to my point, if let's say I had a big stock of fighting birds and I wanted to get rid of them, as you said, that's not something easily you do.
Yeah, no,
so for years I could still have a yard full of fighting birds that someone, if this bill passes, at any point in time could investigate me, probable cause. I'm not an attorney, audio type. Let's watch him closely. Let's see what he's doing.
I disagree, sir, because there's still pit bull breeders in the state of Georgia. Yet, as of last year, because of the good actions of this General Assembly, the state made it illegal to possess a dog with the intent to fight. You've still got shows being set up around the state by organizations that have conformation shows for pit bulls, that have weight pulling events to see which pit bull can pull the most weight. And this has not impacted those activities at all. Now, there are cockfighters that set up poultry shows at cockfighting pits and former cockfighting pits, but there are also legitimate poultry organizations that set up poultry shows. And just because you have chickens, 37 states outlaw possessing a bird with intent to fight. And those 37 states, we aren't seeing innocent poultry breeders being arrested and prosecuted. In these cases, they're always being found guilty. And it would be the same in Georgia. Prosecutors would have to prove the burden would be on a prosecutor's office. And if they can't meet that burden beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's no prosecution, there's no case.
Mrs. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Logic would say that if you don't have spectators, you wouldn't have too many cockfights, I would think. There's going to be some kind of spectators. But could I ask legal counsel to tell us what we did about spectators specifically in the dog fighting bill?
Any person who is knowingly present only as a spectator in any place for fighting a dog shall, upon first condition, be guilty of a misdemeanor of a high aggravated nature. Second condition is a 1 to 5, third or subsequent 1 to 10. Each violation is constitutes separate.
Thank you very much. Don't I recall a discussion of this committee was, thank you very much, Jill, and I think I recall that all the discussion was about this was to discourage people from coming to the dog fights. In other words, to help get rid of the dog fights. I disagree with something.
Before me.
You raise chickens in your backyard for the boys. I'm teasing.
No, my point is that the lady alludes to the debate of the dog fighting, and all I'd say is, looking over to me, that was prior to my time as chair, so I can't speak to that personally.
That's what we did.
So, just to be clear, Mr. Franklin.
You had mentioned that when law enforcement goes to these rural, remote areas, that sometimes they just can't make an arrest under the current law. And I'm wondering, that raised a question in my mind. With limited law enforcement resources, would your opinion, what is your opinion on the wisest use of those limited resources? Should they try to go after those engaged in this type of activity, or would it be more prudent to use those resources to actually try to arrest and bring to prosecution those who are actually infringing on the inalienable God-given rights to life, liberty, and property of another?
Well, I would argue that if law enforcement picks and chooses what laws to enforce, then we create a culture of corruption that I think that former FBI agents can be able to testify to later. It's not up to law enforcement.
Well, this isn't a law yet. This isn't a law yet. So, as leading up to a justification for that, which do you think is more important?
Well, I think that is very
infringing
important.
on a person's right to life, liberty, or property, or this type of activity?
Sir, you're not infringing on life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness by raiding a cockfight. This is something that is illegal already and has been for like 100 years. So there's no issue of life, liberty, and happiness. We've reached a social consensus in this country. All 50 states ban it. It's a felony in 39. It's a misdemeanor in 11. It can be punished as a felony in 39. It's a misdemeanor in 11. And it's actually a federal felony when interstate transport is affected. This has been battled out in the courts. And the courts, both the federal and numerous state levels, have rejected the cockfighters' arguments about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So that's settled. I mean, the issue of cockfighting is a settled matter in the United States. Now it's just a matter of how are we going to have statutes crafted to appropriately deter this activity.
And one further question, if I might. I know there is a spectator event that people train for. So just like in this, where these poultry are trained, where they're trained to inflict pain on others, and as much pain as possible to the point of rendering unconscious. And huge spectator events, lots of money trading places, trading hands, and lots of crowds and spectators. Would you be in favor of a similar piece of legislation to make it a felony in regards to boxing?
I would be strongly opposed to such legislative
So
action.
inflicting
for boxing
pain on a
because-
human being is okay, but not on an animal? Is that your point?
If I may answer the question, you ask good questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer them. There's a matter of free choice here. There's a matter of the fact that the participants in that boxing match get the large amounts of money that you just referred to. And here we're just talking about animals who, they do not tie those knives to their heels on their own. They do not have strychnine-based adrenaline-boosting drugs injected to them on their own. That rooster does not use his beak or his claw to stick that little dropper in his beak to get those drugs in his system. And that rooster does not walk away with any of those derby winnings. That rooster does not transport himself to that pit on his own. Now, Mike Tyson, he has someone drive him to that boxing ring. He enters there of his own free will, and he makes a lot better money doing it than I do or than any of the underpaid legislators here in the Georgia Assembly do.
Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got your packet here from the Humane Society. What's the Humane Society's of Georgia's official position on game hunting?
Well, I'm actually with the Humane Society of the United States,
Okay.
but we have never, despite some of the claims of the cockfighters, we've never pushed a duck hunting bill or a deer hunting bill anywhere in the United States. Now, we are strongly opposed to these canned hunts where, on exotic animals and, some 3-acre pen and shot on for a fee, and, certain cruel practices like steel traps that crush the animal's paws. But we have never pushed legislation about deer hunting or duck hunting, and we have no plans to do so. We're here, we push for legislation on issues where we have about a 70% agreement rate among the general public. And cockfighting is certainly one of them.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. Again, my question was, if I could, with all due respect, what's the Humane Society's official position on hunting? I didn't ask about what bills you pushed, but do you have a position on big game hunting? Do you have a position on falconry, for example? It's legal in Georgia to have a falcon swoop down to a field mouse and grasp him up in his paws, which looks an awful lot like other, birds attacking each other.
I've been at the Humane Society of the United States for 9 years, and I've never heard falconry mentioned. We don't have a position on falconry, but I can tell you this.
I'm sorry, but I did ask you about big game. What is your position on big game hunting? I mean, October 17th in Georgia was a big day this year. That's when the open gun season started, and I know that's on the minds of lots of folks across the state.
It's not an issue that we really get involved in at all. Our position and our policy is that we want to deal with the most egregious and unfair forms of hunting, and we try to make coalitions with other hunting agencies and hunting associations that believe in an element of fair chase and work with them to basically get rid of the black eye that some of these fringe activities give to all hunters. And so our policy is one of cooperation so that we can clean up some activities that I'd say 2/3 of all hunters agree with us on.
So it's the position of the Humane Society that you fully support big game hunting?
I did not say that we support or oppose. We don't support or oppose gun control. We don't support or oppose casino gambling. What we do oppose is certain egregious practices. And our interest with big game hunters is to work with them in a cooperative manner to clean up practices that, frankly, most hunters feel are abhorrent because they violate an element of fair chase, which is what hunting's supposed to be all about.
I understand that, but again, I'm asking you: are you in support of status quo of current laws on big game hunting?
Well, sir, what I was saying is that we've never written down a policy one way or another. Our policy, when it deals with wildlife issues, pertains solely and specifically to egregious and cruel practices, frankly, practices that all ethical hunters are in agreement with the Humane Society of the United States on, and I think probably many legislators are in agreement with us on.
Mr. Everson. And then we'll go next witness after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a general question for my own knowledge and edification here. Of the states that currently have this law, do you have any evidence of apprehension, prosecution, and conviction of the ones caught? participate? What can you give me some examples of what state? I know you mentioned Tennessee for one.
Yeah, well, sure. Or let's say, for example, Florida has a very, very strong law, actually stronger than what we're proposing here with House Bill 109. 37 states prohibit possession of a bird with intent to fight, and some wording of that, training, possessing, and then 41 states prohibit being a spectator. And I'd say 99% of the time these cases come to court. They lead to a prosecution. Now, I've never sat down and actually done the statistics, but for the life of me, I can't think of one where a person was acquitted. There may be one or two, but there were probably about 2,000 to 3,000 people arrested around the country last year on cockfighting charges. I'd say 99% of them were convicted.
So you're under the impression that these laws, once they're passed, they would be vigorously enforced?
Well, I believe so. And I would also point out that they have a deterrent effect. Oklahoma enacted a law. It was passed in 2002. After some legal challenges, it went into effect in 2004, also significantly stronger than House Bill 109. And the number of people that were involved in this industry, it's a criminal industry in Oklahoma now, dropped by about 90%. So a lot of this just simply has a deterrent effect and causes people to go on to more useful, productive hobbies.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Goodwin, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Let me call Mr. Tom Johnson with the Georgia Game Fowl Breeders Association. Mr. Johnson, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
We'd ask you also to, if you would, limit your comments to 5 minutes, and then we'll go around the horn with some questions.
I will. Thank you. All right. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Tom Johnson. I am the president of the Game Fowl Breeders Association, and I am deeply offended that I was called a criminal. All right. Mr. Goodwin up here says that we are a cover-up. All right. We have our bylaws here. We have our state chapter. We've been in here since 1981. All right. We're not a flash in the pan. We've been here. We promote game fowl breeders, period. We do not promote cockfighting. And my question is, we've heard the debates both ways. Is this ownership or cockfighting? What is this bill about? The question that I have. Mr. Goodwin here says the laws that are currently on the book says they have a 99% success rate with prosecution. So if that's the case, the laws work. Why do we need another one? So anyway, so I'll kind of get in my presentation here. Like I say, we promote poultry health through education of our members. We work with the Georgia Poultry Labs for literature and handouts for diseases and practice biosecurity on our farms. Our members participate in a National Poultry Improvement Plan. This program blood tests birds for avian influenza and pleurum typhoid. All these two diseases, if they were to break out in the Georgia poultry industry, it would devastate the state's poultry, which is a very big part of the economy. Out of all of our members, I'm a poultry tester. I go to, and I'm certified through the Department of Agriculture. I go to the farms and pull blood samples and submit them, and we have never had a bird in anybody's flock test positive. So that's a big asset for the protection of Georgia. Our birds are out in the open. They come in contact with migratory birds, which are the main carrier of AI. So in fact, that we, as poultry farmers, we end up, our birds will be infected first if a disease shows up, because migratory birds fly over. Commercial birds are in houses. That will not be subjected to such. Okay, we sponsor shows across the state, and the birds are judged on appearance of their feathers, color of their legs, the muscle tone, and the bone structure. All members receive certificates. They receive ribbons, and Best in Class receives trophies. The overall winner wins a trophy, and I have pictures if anybody would like to look at them. We have adults and kids participate in these shows, and last year we had a few kids that showed all the adults that they had better birds than they did. The smiles on these birds were priceless. Smiles on these kids were priceless. I am here this morning to oppose House Bill 109 because of the language it has, as it reads, quote, that owning, possessing, and keeping a gamecock would make it a felony. The wording in House Bill 109 would make our members felons, as it is worded. Owning, possessing, and keeping a gamecock, that is what we do. So if this law was to pass, these men, women, and children would be committing a crime. We have a member that lived in Spalding County in 2007, and this is where what if comes into play. He was charged with 80 counts of animal cruelty and animal cockfighting. The animal control officer drove by, seen two birds, like Mr. Cole said, sparring on the yard. Well, he had birds on cords. He had birds on his yard. This animal control person deemed that it was a cockfighting operation, confiscated all his birds, confiscated his pens, confiscated his feed, took them to an undisclosed location. This case went on for 2 years. He was found innocent. Meanwhile, his birds were euthanized. He has 2 years worth of lawyer bills and nothing to show for it. No compensation, nothing. No, you can't replace them. This is the kind of what if could happen. You know, this could happen to me with this bill. This could happen to any of our members. We own game fowl. Does that make us a felon? It shouldn't, because we are not felons. I have a breed of birds that if they were euthanized, confiscated and euthanized, I could not replace them. These birds I've had for many, many years, and they are, to me, irreplaceable. The members here may think, oh, they're just a chicken. But no, they're irreplaceable to me. I'm here today to fight for my rights, not take anybody's rights away. The Humane Society's here from D.C., and they're here to take all our rights away. Why? If the system works, he said 99%, it works. We do not need more legislation. It just clutters up courts, it clutters up the legislature for no reason.
Mr. Johnson, let me break in and ask you a question.
Sure.
About 5 minutes. So I'll take issue. I'll agree with you on one thing, and then I'm going to take issue with you in another and get your reaction to it. Mr. Cole's example seems to be the operative example that you're using on, where you have the otherwise innocent individuals, you know, in their yard, and two animals engaging in certain conduct. All of a sudden, there's potential conduct there that's prosecutable under the law, under this proposed law. I understand that, and I agree with that. So it comes into a matter of prosecutorial discretion, and you certainly don't want to have, or you want to mitigate to the extent that you can, an eye of the beholder decision-making process on the part of law enforcement. You want it to be pretty cut and dry, and you don't want there to be too much latitude. You want it to be very strongly identifiable conduct, and not have something that would be absurd on its face all of a sudden be criminal conduct, or it would be absurd to most of us on its face, become criminal conduct. I understand where you're coming from on that. The one thing I would take issue with you, though, is that if you look on, you talked about owns, possesses, keeps, or trains on line 18, and without getting into the specific wording, and could this be more artfully worded, perhaps, but the underlying concept remains the same. It's not owns, possesses, keeps, or trains. It's with the intent that such cock engage in an exhibition of fighting with another.
Right.
So it's not the simple ownership of I own this animal, therefore, you know, or I own a group of animals, or I own a big number of these animals, and therefore I'm guilty. It goes to the conduct really of with the intent to engage in some otherwise illegal activity.
Right.
You would agree with that, right? Okay, so it's not simply a matter of ownership. Ownership does not equal guilt under this proposed bill. It's ownership with the intent to engage in certain conduct, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure we had clarity on that. Mr. Levitas.
Thank you for being here, first of all. Two quick questions. As I understand your testimony, neither your organization does not condone or support or advocate for cockfighting. Is that
No.
correct? And your particular association is in the breeding and raising and showing of these fowl.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay. So as far as the whether, as a citizen, you may have an opinion on the spectator aspect. From your association's point of view, that's not the issue that you have with this bill. It's really just the wording of the ownership aspect.
The ownership, and basically they're saying, and you've heard it here today, if you own a gamecock, you have intent.
Right. What I'm saying is putting aside that issue, there's two things, as I understand it, the bill's trying to accomplish.
I don't think that's how it was characterized. I mean, with all due respect, and I'll go back in 5 seconds. I don't think anyone has made that conclusion. Ownership equals that was the line of questioning I just had with you a minute ago. Ownership does not equal guilt. It's ownership with the intent to engage in certain conduct. And I thought we were clear on that.
Well, my question to you is, how can you tell the difference?
Well, it is a fact-specific situation. I mean, I'm not. I don't say otherwise. But that being said, and again, as I said before, it's not a we want to make those fact-specific situations as readily identifiable as possible. We don't want to have too broad a discretion, because that gets pretty subjective after a while in terms of enforcement. But it doesn't change the fact that we are not looking at a situation where ownership equals guilt. I think you agreed to that about 5 minutes ago. Okay, thank you.
And again, what I'm suggesting is I see the overall structure of the bill. There's two things that this bill is trying to address. One is the ownership with the intent, and the other is the spectator of cockfighting. And what I'm asking you, since your organization doesn't condone, support, advocate for cockfighting, it's not really the spectator part. It's not the entire bill that your association would have a problem with. It's specifically the language of the ownership and the intent language of the ownership. Is that
correct?
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mrs. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I think the previous gentleman, when he was talking about it working, was talking about it across the United States and the prosecutions. Thank you. I thought my voice was loud enough. So, in general, it wasn't just talking about the Georgia law. And like in our dogfighting bill, we did have some loopholes in that we closed. I also find that there's usually two sides to every story down here. So,
correct.
Right. But I don't know about cockfighting or whatever you call these chick roosters, whatever they are. Are they, like, how many do you own?
I own approximately probably 100.
Okay.
Total, hens, chicks, everything.
Okay. And not yours, but just in general. Are they normally combative animals?
Yes.
That's been bred into them to fight?
It's a characteristic that is seeked highly of, yes.
So if they are together with another, what do you just cock, what you call them?
Yeah.
Okay, if they are normally together, they're going to fight?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not that they're deprived of food or anything else, or mistreated, or taught like the dogs were mistreated.
No.
They're just going to fight if there's two of them together.
It's instinct.
An inbred type. Okay, what do you do with yours, and what do people who breed them do with them? Are they all kept as pets and named? Are they all yours that are special to you, or do you sell them across the country, or what?
The reason we breed so many, because we have shows. You have standards. Everyone that comes out is not perfect. I have 2 children to prove that. But
a lot of people that way.
But anyway, there's certain individuals have desirable traits, as in dogs, as in horses, as in everything else.
And so you just keep breeding them, and how long
for
do they
selection.
live normally if they're not out fighting? How long do they live normally?
I have some that's 10, 12 years old.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ramsey.
Thank you for testifying today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. quite often we have bills before this committee that affect a specific industry, and whether it be regulatory, criminal punishment, the broad spectrum of the laws that we discuss in this hearing room. And quite often the association that represents the affected industry here at game fowl breeding will come and tell us about what you're doing internally to root out bad actors. What do you have a process for reporting folks that are engaging in illegal activities? Do you have a process to raise awareness about changes in laws or on what is in fact illegal in the state of Georgia among the members of your association? Do you have any? Can you provide us any insight into those kind of activities your association is engaging in? And second part, do you know of any instances where a member of your association has turned into authorities one of these bad actors, people that are engaging in conduct that is illegal, the cockfights?
As far as policing our organization, no, we do not police our organization. We have a board of directors, we have officers, and at these meetings, we sponsor poultry shows, fundraising events, stuff like this, and it's open to the public. Anybody can show up. Somebody who has chickens for 4-H or whatever, they're invited. But these, we do not have any policing act, and no, we have never had. Our people are generally decent people.
And I'm sure that's true. But wouldn't you agree that it's in your interest as an association, because you talk about the black eye, that there's kind of a stigma that some may hold? Wouldn't it be in your interest to put some kind of process in place where your industry, I mean, typically you're going to have the best opportunity members that are raising game fowl would probably have a better opportunity to know about illegal cockfighting activities than the average citizen, just because it's kind of, that's just the nature of being involved in raising those type of birds.
There's really no way we could police it.
I'm not saying police it. I'm saying identify and report bad actors, so that people that are charged with policing those conduct can do that job.
When people come to poultry shows, they have to be a member to show. So when they come up, they sign their memberships up, they show their birds, they go home. We really have no other interaction with them.
Okay. So I guess to wrap up my original question, that you have no, within your bylaws, I know you showed your bylaws, there's no process or procedure, there's no educational program to raise awareness among your membership about identifying people that are engaging in illegal activities?
No.
Okay.
Mr. Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do you tell what a good game bird is? Is it? I mean, when you say game bird, are you talking about birds that would be cockfighting birds if it weren't unlawful?
It's a general breed.
General breed.
You have breeds inside that are, all of them are called gamecocks.
Gamecocks.
But you have several breeds from Orientals to standards to you have Kelsos, you have hatch roosters, you have and such. So there's breeds inside of the general term gamecock.
What do you have to do to be a good gamecock?
Look pretty.
Look pretty? Real? I mean, is that it? Really, just colors and size and how many feathers you have and whatever?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Preston over here is holding the standards, American game breed standards and everything.
This is American Standards of Perfection.
This
is the American Game Fowl Society, and this is the American Game Standard, written up by individuals.
Thank you. Mr. Franklin.
This one is by the American Social.
Thank you. If you could clarify a statement that had been made earlier about the aggressiveness being bred into these birds, is the fighting characteristic bred in, or are just any two random roosters, whether they be at the chicken plant or raised for eating, are they going to, just for the fact that they are male chickens, you put two of them together, are they going to shows some aggression.
It's just instinct, yes.
So it's not that is actually bred into these specific birds.
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, thank you.
Can I finish my statement, please, if at all possible?
We really need to move on to other witnesses. I think we've got the gist of where you are. Promise.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Let me call. There are witnesses here who have put down acronyms, some of which I know and some of which I don't know. So I'm going to go with that. Who's actually written it out first? Regina Wells with the Georgia Animal Control Association. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And I'll give you the same admonition that I gave the others if you could limit
Won't take me
it.
but
Please.
a second. Mine's more of a story.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
My name is
Yes, ma'am.
Virginia
Thank you.
Wells. I'm with the Tifton Tift County Animal Shelter. I am the director there. I'm also with the Georgia Animal Control Association. I'm going to tell you a story. Mine's more of a story, probably going to take you a different direction. I live in Tifton, Tift County, South Georgia. So I'm dealing with a lot of Hispanics. On the Easter Sunday in 2006, at 12:13, we were called to a code that we have for cockfighting. We also have one for dog fighting. I was the second one there after SO. There was about 150 people. It just went everywhere. We arrested some. We arrested 21. There was one Caucasian. The rest of them were Hispanics. What really caught my attention was two little 6-year-old boys. One had a rooster in this hand, and the other one had his rooster, and they had the spurs on, spurring them and just having them a good time, because that's what they know. There was 15 children. I automatically called DFACS, so their little party, we busted up about 150 people, and like I said, we did arrest 21. We seized 42 birds, and to answer your question a while ago, this was on a Sunday, on an Easter Sunday, and Monday morning about 8 o'clock at the shelter, I had a sanctuary call me, and they came that following week and picked up the birds. So we did not have to euthanize any of them. There were probably approximately about 30 that was laying around deceased. And like I said, South Georgia, we have it a lot. We have Hispanics doing this down there. And the children, they make it a family affair.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Tell me, how is it relevant that they're Hispanic or not? Tell me why is that relevant?
It's not. It was just what happened that day, sir.
Okay.
That's all.
I was just curious. Questions? Mr. Levitas.
You took number one, and number two will be very brief. In either your opinion or in the agencies, are there any legitimate game fowl breeders who breed only for show as opposed to cockfighting, or is it the position that it's all an illegal enterprise?
The ones I've dealt with has been more for cockfighting. They'll tell you.
Yeah, and I'm just was curious. Have you found any that raise just for show, or
No, not around my area, no, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
David Lyons with, is it the Georgia Council? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. You try to guess at an acronym and you get it all wrong. Right. I'm just not going to guess anymore. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen.
Let's have order at the committee table, please.
My name is David Lyons. I'm the Chief of Police of the Garden City Police Department. In case you don't know, Garden City is right adjacent to Savannah in southeastern Georgia, a little small town of about almost 12,000 people, commercial, industrial, and residential. You might ask, what does Garden City have to do with cockfighting? And I will tell you how I got here and how this bill got here. We answered a complaint, neighborhood complaint between two neighbors that was pretty much like the Hatfields and McCoys. They just didn't like each other. And one of these individuals happens to be a cock breeder. And I won't say a cockfighting breeder because we never got to the point where we could prove one way or the other if he was raising them for the point of fighting or if he was just raising them as these gentlemen over here. do for show or research or whatever. He had about, depending on what day of the week it was, between 125 and 300 birds on his little piece of ground inside the city of Garden City. And how he did that is he was grandfathered in. That was an rural agricultural area that we annexed some years ago, and because he was already there, he could keep his gamecocks on his property. And I would emphasize that this man did everything right. I mean, he had a very nice facility. It was inspected and approved by the Department of Agriculture. Nothing wrong with his operation whatsoever. But because of the complaints that we received from his neighbor, we did investigate. And in the process of investigating, I was shocked to discover that there's no cockfighting law in the state of Georgia. There are people that tell you that cockfighting in Georgia is a felony. It's not. Aggravated animal cruelty is a felony. And for me as a law enforcement officer to arrest and charge someone with aggravated cruelty, I have to show that the bird was maimed and or killed. If I get there early in the fight and the birds are just starting and they're in the pit and there's no serious injury to either one of the birds, I've got misdemeanor animal cruelty at best. I can't charge any of the spectators. I can't charge the individual that hosted the fight. I can't charge anyone else except the two people in the pit. And if I was able to witness and be able to prove a gambling transaction, I might be able to charge those individuals as well. So in the course of investigating this particular cock raising enterprise, I did quite a bit of research on other state laws around the state, and we began to draft a bill with the help of Representative Bryant and our legal office with the city, and that's how we got to House Bill 109. Our bill, the language in this bill is very similar to other bills around the state. I think the last staunch bastion of anti-cockfighting was in Louisiana. They passed their bill last year. If they can get a bill passed, Georgia ought to have a piece of cake. It was mentioned earlier about cockfighting breeders and cock birds that are raised for fighting. Our research indicated that, yeah, the birds have a natural instinct to fight, but they are bred. Breeders breed their birds to get the best fighting bird that they can possibly get. And then they dope these birds up with strychnine and adrenaline and all kinds of other stuff and send them into the pit with the gaffs, and they cut each other to pieces. As has been mentioned earlier, the Georgia Chiefs Association, along with the Georgia Sheriff's Association, supports this. The GBI supports this bill simply because we don't have an adequate investigative tool to investigate and prosecute cockfighting arenas and people that participate in cockfighting arenas around the state. We have no quarrel with these gentlemen here that breed cocks for research, for hobbies, for whatever reason, because the wording of the bill says intent to engage in cockfighting. Nothing more, nothing less. I don't have the resources, and I doubt that any other law enforcement agency in the state has the resources to go after somebody that just raises birds for a hobby, if it's strictly for a hobby. This is for the cockfighting aspect. And the lady that preceded me mentioned the children. My research indicated that many times children are present at these cockfights. There's drugs and illegal guns and all kinds of things that are unsavory to me as a law enforcement officer. And that's the reason that we've been involved and became involved in this bill. All we want to do is close the loopholes and make it easier for us to enforce the laws of the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief. You had stated that what prompted this was the issue you had within the city limits with these two sparring families. Excuse my pun, but and you said he had done everything right.
He did, yes.
I mean, he had inspected. He was running a clean operation.
He had a first-class operation, and the only thing that we had was rumor that he was raising these birds for fighting, and this came basically from the neighbor and the neighbors' allies who sided with them and would bring us photographs and videotapes and all kinds of stuff. But because of the current or lack of current law, we didn't pursue it any further, because if he was raising the birds for fighting, and if he was going to the flea market and selling them, it was not against the law as long as he didn't take them across state lines.
I guess, so he was doing everything right by the current law.
Yes.
But if we were to pass this bill here, then possibly we could go back and find some things that he wasn't doing right.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, that's, to me, that contradicts. I mean, when you went to investigate, you said he was doing everything right. He had a clean operation. The Department of Agriculture had inspected him. It seems that another leading question, were there any court instances between these two families?
They were in my court probably once a week for 6 months for one thing or the other. Assaults and threats and terroristic threats. And
that's my fear, Mr. Chairman, like I alluded in my first example. You know, it seems like we're looking for a reason to go further to see if we can find something.
Well, let's flesh that out a little bit, because what I'm hearing is, let's refrain from comments from anyone other than someone at the microphone. Clear this up for me, because I'm a little confused. I heard you say a few minutes ago that first-class operation, nothing wrong with it, looked like it was perfectly legitimate. But did you have some sort of articulable suspicion that there was something else going on that you just couldn't put your finger on, or was it something?
We had articulable suspicion that there was something else going on, but it would not be illegal under the statutes on the books today.
Okay, but
if this House Bill 109 were to pass, then yes, and that would have spurred an extensive investigation, and then we would have gotten the proof that this was not just a legitimate fowl breeder that was breeding fowls for hobby, to show, for research, or for whatever reason. That if our investigation revealed that he was in fact breeding these birds for cockfighting, then we would have had a case to proceed further.
Forgive me, Chief, but couldn't you have you can go investigate what you want to investigate as to whether or not the evidence that you go ahead and come up with is something that you can fit neatly into a particular statute and go ahead and go to the DA with. That's a whole other story, and I get that. But you could have investigated, and I assume you did investigate.
We did.
You did?
Yes.
And, I'm trying to figure out exactly what did you actually find. Hold on, you'll have your... What did you actually find that leads you to believe that if you'd had this statute, you'd be able to go further? Because I thought I heard you say that it was a first-class operation. I'm confused, so please straighten me out.
From the aspects that we could look at, it was a first-class operation. We contacted the Department of Agriculture. They came down, inspected this facility. He had an agricultural permit to raise.
So they went inside and they rooted through everything.
They went in there. They looked at the health and welfare of the birds and all of that sort of stuff.
All right.
We did not pursue it from a criminal aspect because there was no indication of any kind of criminal activity that we could prosecute under the animal cruelty statute.
Okay, there's nothing that you could find
point.
that you could prosecute. No, did you find anything, but you just couldn't prosecute it, or did you just not find anything?
We did not. We didn't pursue anything
agriculture
beyond that. Beyond that initial investigation, we didn't pursue it any further because there was no need. I'm not going to waste my resources on something that I'm not going to. There's no statute that's going to give me the tools to prosecute.
I'm not. Please understand, Chief. I appreciate your being here, and I'm really not trying to badger you, but I am trying to figure out: did your agency, your police department, and or the agricultural department go in and find X that that's a real concern, but we can't do anything, or did they just not find X?
Well, the agriculture did not look for anything other than the operation itself.
Oh, the normal health.
The normal health and the food and the tethering and the teepees and all of that sort of stuff.
Okay.
And he had his records and all that stuff.
Okay.
So they didn't pursue it anything beyond that. And once we found out he had a legitimate permit, we found out that the grandfather was going to cover having the birds inside the city, and that even if he was going to the flea market and selling these birds, we didn't pursue that any further because it would not have been illegal.
Okay. Mr. Sessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, appreciate you coming up. I want to try to clarify what I think I heard you suggesting. Under the current law, let's say that you had found, perhaps in or outside of your jurisdiction, that the people to whom this gentleman in your city was selling the birds were using them for cockfighting. Are you saying at the current state of the law is such that if the gentleman in your city sells them to someone else who uses them for cockfighting, only the people that place the birds in the pit to fight can be charged?
That's right.
The current state of the law is such that a supplier of cockfighters can't be prosecuted.
That's correct.
I think that was, Mr. Chairman, I think that was his point.
That's my point.
That there's nothing back in the logistics chain that leads to cockfighting that would allow anyone in that chain to be prosecuted under the current law unless they're the ones that put the birds in the ring. That's what I thought I heard you say.
Exactly.
Mr. Everson, or did you want to follow up? Because I know you had something before, but if not, that's fine too. All right, Mr. Franklin.
Thank you. You had mentioned not wanting to waste your limited resources, and the gentleman from D.C. had pointed out that as law enforcement, you just can't pick and choose what laws you are going to enforce. So once we pass a law, then it is your duty to enforce it. And it's already been testified today that the object of this particular piece of legislation does not, that activity does not infringe on the inalienable God-given right to life, liberty, or property of another. And yet, with the enactment of this type of legislation, that are basically bad because government says it's bad rather than bad on its face because it is bad, with your limited resources, would you, with the enactment of this bill, would that take resources away from you going after this activity that could more productively be used to go after the child molesters who kidnap, abuse, and kill and dump in a landfill these young victims? Doesn't that take resources away from you that could be better used to bring to justice those who actually do infringe on life, liberty, and property?
Well, I would argue, and you could make the analogy of the gaming machines. You know, we've got gaming machines in Garden City and service stations and convenience stores. Some pay off and some don't. There's a segment of society that argues that so what? It's still against the law to have and possess a gaming machine in the state. You could argue that's a waste of my resources, but if I get a complaint, then I'm bound by my oath to go and investigate that. If I get a complaint, as I did in this particular case about this individual raising fighting cocks, we're bound by law to go investigate, just as we're bound by law to investigate the child molester or the missing child. And you know, back to your comment about, you know, inalienable rights and God-given rights, I have difficulty believing that you know, when God created the heavens and the earth, that He had cockfighting in mind. And I also, I mean, cockfighting is bad societally, whether or not the state makes it bad or not. It's bad societally. There's no civil society, in my opinion, would not say that cockfighting is a good thing. I mean, it is bad on itself.
And I haven't heard anyone say that it's a good thing and is a laudable thing, and I would find it reprehensible. I'm just thinking of the proper jurisdiction of the state and the state's function of punishing those who infringe on the life, liberty, or property of another, and thinking of you as law enforcement having to make those tough decisions of what do I send an officer out to do. I've got a kidnap victim. I don't know whether this child is alive or not, or do I go out to this farm?
Well, and obviously, you know, we prioritize cases every day, and we don't pick and choose what we investigate. Obviously, if we get a complaint, we're going to investigate it. But obviously, if I'm, and this is my department, I can't speak for the 1,100 and so police departments and 159 sheriff's departments, but if it's my department and we have an investigation going on with a cockfighting ring on the fringes of town, and we've got a missing child, I'm going to throw everything I've got to the missing child, and the cockfighting ring is going to take a back burner. At some point, when things calm down and we find the child molester and locate the missing child, we're going to go back to the cockfighting ring. I don't give up on anything. And we're going to keep on until we either exhaust our proof, exhaust our resources, or we have, in fact, solved the case and made an arrest and got a prosecution.
Mrs. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my esteemed colleague, sort of in my area of expertise, I think you will find that study after study indicates that children who learn cruelty to animals as young children are often our child molesters, our child killers, and our adult killers in later life. And that has been proven over and over and over and over again. So that if we really do have children go into cockfights and battering the animals, and they learn this at very young age, it's not a good indicator for future activities. What I have for the sheriff, didn't you say, and like Mr. Setzler said, didn't you say that they had proof on videos and pictures or something the neighbors did, despite the conflict them that might have indicated that the
well, they were trying. They did not bring me any proof that we could prosecute on. I mean, okay, they brought me. They set up cameras in their backyards and took video of this individual shooting chickens in his backyard, and I mean, okay, and hauling them off to the dump. And other than using a public dump for disposal of animal carcasses, there was nothing we could do about that.
Chief, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time and effort in coming up here today. I think I see two more individuals from the Game Breeders Association. Do you folks want to testify as well in addition to what Mr. Johnson has said, or has it been said, I guess is my question. Preston. All right. All right. So, Mr. Smoke, is that who I'm? Okay. Mr. Grady Smoke with the Georgia Game Fowl Breeders Association as well, and then Preston. Preston, why don't you just come up here as well, and y'all can appear jointly, one right after the other, and then we'll continue from there. I would ask you, please, if you could, to if you can limit collectively to 5 minutes, that'd be great. If you can't, do the best you can. Thank you. And let me ask you, if you could, to come forward and pull the microphones toward you so that you can be heard over the system.
My name is Grady Smoke. I guess I'm one of the Hatfield and McCoys. I'm the man who was accused of fighting chickens in Garden City. I don't know what really to say. This whole incident come about because I had terroristic threat charges against my neighbor. After I had terroristic threat charges against him, he proceeds calling the police on me about fighting chickens at my house. They came to my house several times, and they never saw nothing because I'm not breaking any laws. I raise game chickens. I've raised game chickens all my life, and I've heard a lot of people describe them up here, but the way I describe a game roost is the most beautiful thing God ever put on earth. One of the last things I'd love to hear in my life before I die is my son saying bye and a game rooster crowing. That's how much I love it. I raise them as a hobby, and now my hands are tied. I have sold some chickens, but because of the problems around Garden City there, I don't want to get in no trouble. I don't want to accidentally sell some chickens to somebody and he goes out and fights them. I don't want to break no laws. I love a game rooster. I enjoy my hobby, but this whole bill is solely, I feel in my heart, against me. And I do appreciate Chief Lyons' honesty about the condition of my birds and the condition of my yard, because I don't abuse my chickens. I take very good care of them. I really don't know what to say. I'm a little bit nervous up here, but
Please don't be.
I'm
Please
trying
don't
to
be.
be honest with you guys.
That's all we can ask.
As I can be. This bill, if this bill is passed, they can come to my house with my game roosters there, and all they got to do is get one officer to come in there and say, "You're raising fighting cocks. You're going to jail." Well, then I've got to go out and hire a lawyer, spend a lot of money to prove my innocence. Sir, the way I understand this law, I'm guilty. I've got to prove my innocence. And I've spent a lot of money on legal fees between me and my neighbor in the dispute that I've had in Garden City with my neighbor. I can't afford no more. If this bill is passed, I would have to literally do something to my chickens, get rid of them. They don't want me to dispose of them. So I've got handcuffs on me now, right now. Just like this past year, I raised no chickens for show. No chickens. But as all of us game breeders are, we have hens running loose on the yard, and the hen, naturally they're going to go to a rooster, and next thing you know, you got little bitties running around. And I've got roosters now that I'm having to pin up that I don't even want to pin up, that I would like to dispose of, and I'm in a mess.
Well, we appreciate.
I got cameras all over my yard, just like Sheriff Lyons says. I've got cameras all over my yard, and I always thought that, and I read that law, and the law stated in there that if a person wasn't breaking the law, it was illegal for them to film you. There again, if we're going to, enforce laws, let's enforce that law. I broke no laws, so why do they have a right to film me in my yard, my own personal yard? I went to great expense of moving chickens from the back fence where he was at. I had about a half acre there, and I moved them back to the woods back there. Well, now when I moved them back there, the neighbors back in the back started complaining about the crowing. Another thing I want to point out too, I did not want to be annexed.
All right, Mr. Smoke, let me just give it, just cut it right there. I have to be candid with you. I appreciate your coming in and testifying as anyone can and anyone should. But candidly, we're not here to talk about the specifics of your personal situation. Yes. What I can tell you is, this is a hearing, and we're here to go ahead and get both sides of the story. That's what we do. And we're going to go ahead and weigh the pros and the cons in the context of a lot of the testimony we've heard today. But we can't look at it. We can't look at it in the context of an individual case. We have to take a much broader view of it. So, but we do appreciate your testimony.
That's the biggest reason I was here. The only reason I'm testifying is to protect my rights to be a Georgia game breeder, and I'm also a member of the American Game Breeders Association. I've got ribbons, and I ain't won no trophies yet, but I got some ribbons. But I'd like to preserve game chickens as long as I'm living. That's my final statement. Thank you for letting me speak.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming here and letting us know. Sir.
I'll be brief. I handed out a little packet. This first page in here, the four-way test, I think we all, everybody in the audience included, ought to look at that. This is something that was taken from Rotary International. I think it's a good test of what you intend to do about situations. I want to clarify one thing. We keep talking about breeding these birds to fight. These are descendants of the jungle fowl, and you can go back and find records where they were captured just to watch them fight, because they will fight to the death in the jungle. I have a letter from Dr. Stan Veazey, University of Georgia in the poultry division. He states the same thing. Just a little bit at y'all's leisure time, if you'll flip through this, it's some interesting history about game fowl, how our presidents used to own them. They used to fight them in the White House, in the basement. And also there's a page in here about economical impact. I think somebody mentioned something about the United Game Fowl Breeders doing a study. And if you'll look on the bottom, that number 20 there is talking about, and this is about 2001, the industry here in Georgia was over $10 million, and I'm sure it's gone up since then. There's a little synopsis at the back of it. It was by Dr. Clifford Bryant. It's called the Clemson Report. He did a study on cockfighters, and it's just a review at the back of what he found is what type of people are cockfighters. Now, I'm going to make one statement. I'm a retired cockfighter. I used to go to Louisiana. I used to fight chickens. They closed Louisiana down. I've had chickens for over 30 years. Now I show them. I'm a certified judge. Being with these other guys, the implementation of this law would make it awful hard on us because we would continuously have to defend ourselves in the court of law. And I urge you to reconsider no on this 109.
Let me ask you a question. If the law, just hypothetically, if we were to take House Bill 109 and to tailor it more narrowly than its current breadth, such that the folks in your industry would be protected from prosecution for truly innocent conduct, what would be your position on that? I realize that's a broad statement, and it really
I'm going to be honest with you.
Just finish this. The devil does come down to the details, and we understand that more than most.
I'll be honest with you. I would be against any cockfighting law.
That's what I was curious
about. The reason I say this is a natural thing. Now, yes, we enhance it a little bit. Now we start talking about paraphernalia. I've got them because I used to have them, when I was participating. However, now they're in a little plaque up on the wall.
But I thought I heard your members say that they don't engage in cockfighting.
Some of them don't. I'm talking about Preston.
Oh, okay. I thought you represented your association.
No, well, I'm just speaking to myself right now.
Okay.
But I used to referee. And, of course, I never got the reputation that Abe Lincoln did as Honest Abe. That's how he got his reputation as Honest Abe for refereeing cockfights. But in Louisiana, I'm serious, in Louisiana, where I worked, they issued 1099s. Everything was up and aboard. There's a town called Sunset, Louisiana. Since they've closed down, go look at the town. It's about gone away.
Well, what is the position of your association then? I mean, is it the position of your association that they would oppose any bill, or would they be willing to support a bill that gave them true protections from prosecution under the law for conduct that was truly innocent?
Yes, we would support a bill that would keep us innocent.
That's what I was trying to find out.
Yes.
But thank you for your testimony. Mr. Setzler.
He largely answered it. I was just going to ask the owner, the gentleman here from Garden City, am I hearing you right in kind of summarizing what you said, in that your position is the fact that you simply own a certain breed of animal opens you up to a firestorm of potential charges that anyone you sell it to, even in a legal sale, could potentially be using it in fighting, and that the very presence of these fowl on your property, the fact that you own a certain breed, opens you up to attacks from every direction that has the effect of really prohibiting you from even owning the breed. Is that in essence what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, sir, and this is the problem that I have. The law enforcement has been in my yards 3 different times, the Garden City Police 4, with accusations that I was fighting chickens, or there was cockfighting going on in my backyard. Well, never once did they prove it. But here's the thing with this law: if this law is passed, if one of these birds was to get out of a pen, and sir, we're constantly battling that. We have to maintain great pens for them. We have to maintain great tie cords. If one of them was to accidentally get out and get on a rooster on the tie cord and fight, police comes over there and they see these 2 roosters fighting, then they can charge me with a felony. That's to what wording is in this law.
Mr. Everson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you stated it well earlier. We all want good legislation, and I'm in no way in favor of inhumane treatment of any animal. But I think where we are now is the fact that we need to tailor this legislation so we can appease both parties. And my question to you and my good friend Representative Bob Bryant, did you all have negotiations or meetings on this proposal? Was input made?
Are you talking to me, sir?
Well, both. Did you speak to Representative Bryant? Representative Bryant, did you speak to the industry that is in opposition to your legislation to see if you can't work out a compromise or good legislation to accommodate both sides?
I'd personally like to have a meeting with Representative Bryant. I was wanting to do it last year, but I was, to be honest with you, I had so many charges and stuff coming up on it. My lawyer advised me not to say anything.
I think Mr. Everson's point is that it may behoove interested parties to communicate.
I would.
To see if there may be a version that might be mutually acceptable. My sense is from the testimony that I've heard, just speaking for myself, is that the real fear comes with unintended consequences, and just by virtue of ownership equaling guilt, and that's a function of the way the statute is worded, and it's also a function of prosecutorial discretion. And Mr. Franklin's point on that much earlier is well taken. But it does behoove interested parties to get together to try to work out a compromise. That makes the legislative process a lot smoother. It generally results in much better law as well, as opposed to just trying to generate a particular product, regardless, or it results in non-passage at all. So with that, let me just make that statement and shift it over to Mrs. Cooper for the last question on this round.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
That's all right. That's all right.
Since you brought it up, sir, and we don't usually go on individual cases, but you have brought it up and testified, there seems to be a little bit of an unusual case because you're talking about the police coming. And in the beginning, I heard you say that you made terroristic threats against your neighbor, and that's what started it.
No, ma'am. My neighbor made terroristic threats against me, and I'm in the process right now prosecuting him for it. And he also he trespassed. He went trespassing on my property. He cut part of my fence down. That's part of the problem. But anyway, I could go on all day with that. I'm sorry.
Okay, but I mean, here again, I think yours is a little bit unusual, and the police might be being called out not so much because you own chickens, but this has gotten to be a Hatfield and McCoy case. And to you, sir, didn't you say that y'all did enhance the chickens with the knives and stuff to fight
in the legal states? Now, I don't know about the medicines. You know, you feed them good food, good vitamins, but you do that every day. It's 365 days a year.
Gentlemen, thank you. Ms. Rebecca Alexander, would you like to be heard, or? And you've heard the 5-minute admonition already, so I won't say it.
Yes.
Even though I just said it.
Okay, yes, my name is Rebecca Alexander. I have a degree in criminology, which I know that's not relevant, except that I was in college in the 80s in an area in East Tennessee where my mother had grown up, and I attended a cockfight as a spectator. At the time, I did not know it was illegal. Actually, I had never. My family.
Let me interrupt you. You're representing a particular organization, correct?
Yes.
Let me ask you to
HSUS.
identify that. And what is that?
The Humane Society of the United States.
Thank you.
Yeah. I grew up in the South, but no one in my family. We did not have roosters. I don't have these nice little stories about chickens being in my backyard or any of that. So I didn't know what. When I heard these people talking about it and I saw the teepees and all this, I had no idea what was going on with this. And I was intrigued by the conversation I would hear. Actually, one of my fiancés had a brother who claimed to be a cockfighter, and he had his backyard was full of these things, these teepees and so. And I didn't understand what they were talking about, why the controversy was surrounded this activity and why they were only allowed so many roosters in the backyard and why they of course they claimed to be great animal lovers, and but if I had, and they would talk about the fight and transporting them in and out of the state and how much money they were making and going in even in and out of the country. I finally was able to attend a cockfight one Sunday afternoon. I finally talked someone into my curiosity, they finally let me go. They're not that easy to attend. And what I saw there was very barbaric, to say the least. These razors and these spurs are just all this training that goes on 365 days a year. With these, I mean, they gave them drugs, they gave them hormones, they gave them shots, the strychnine and the whole mess, and they always had terrible infections on their arms because the spurs, if they hit you, cause terrible infections. Anyway, I don't want to get too much off, but there's a great deal of gambling. They go to undisclosed locations because I was asking why are you going? Why aren't you just going to your backyard? Why are you going like out in the middle of nowhere? And of course, what I saw there was like about 40 people who had brought their roosters. And I'm waiting for these animal lovers to take these the roosters that failed home, and they're throwing them like in a pile, a big bloody pile. And at the end of this fight, of course, I'm scared to death to say anything because by now I'm seeing drugs, large amounts of alcohol, kids. The gasoline came out. They burned this bloody pile of roosters alive, then brought out a shovel and buried the evidence of what was going on. Of course, when I'm asking, why did all this have to happen? And I learned that, it was a misdemeanor. Of course, this is the 80s. Of course, I don't think it would have been even a law against me spectating. I don't even know. I mean, I never went again and never associated with these people again. But it was just, it was pretty horrific to see something like that. And I imagine it would be for anyone. Of course, these people didn't claim to be show breeders or anything like that.
Thank you. Mr. Levitas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll also try and be brief. Actually, I wasn't even intending to ask you this question, but you brought it up. The way I read this statute, if it was passed, you actually would be, even if you were there to investigate animal cruelty, you actually would be guilty of a misdemeanor for being present, right?
Yes.
Okay. So
I had never heard of anything.
Let me just
like
finish.
That.
And so we probably need to clean that language up. You would agree, no matter what, just to not capture people who just are there for reasons other than to.
Yes, I think these days pretty well everyone knows what animal fighting is.
Well, but my point is you did too, and you would have been guilty of a misdemeanor.
No, I didn't know that it entailed something, things like that. I thought when they were talking about chickens fighting, they were talking about what these gentlemen were talking about. They're just kind of playing around in the yard. If somebody died, they had a little funeral, and they were like, animal lovers, and
right.
And
I guess
it was complete crap.
I know we need to move on, but I think we'll have to agree to disagree. I think that you would have been captured by this, and all I'm suggesting is that this language may need to be cleaned up. And my only other question is, obviously we've heard two different sides of the story. One is for folks that believe there is absolutely no lawful purpose to have these game cocks bred, raised at all. Another side that says, yes, there is, that we do this because we participate in this, we breed them to show them, that's all we do. Do you foresee any way to come up with exactly what the chairman was talking about and what Representative Everson were talking about, a way to forge a bill that would outlaw the conduct you're trying to outlaw, but not capture folks who are breeding these purely for show? Or do you feel that there is no such thing as somebody breeding them for show?
I wouldn't have any objection any more than I would for pit bulls, that you're breeding for show, except that when you're breeding, if it were dogs, if you're breeding dogs, you're kind of adding to the overpopulation. That's the only thing I have against any kind of breeders, is that we already have way, way too many pets that don't have homes. And why would I care about someone who just wants to show their roosters? Why would?
That was exactly my question.
But they would have paraphernalia, the spurs, the razors, the hypodermic needles, all these things.
And that may be one of the areas we can pursue. But I know, Mr. Chairman, you need to move on. I appreciate
and scars,
the answer.
I mean.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it. I don't think so. Well, maybe. Mr. Tom Farrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Tom Farrow. I own T.E. Farrow and Associates. It's an investigations firm centered in Northeast Tennessee. I investigate cockfighting throughout the southeast corridor of the United States. I'm a court-recognized expert in cockfighting in the Northeast District of Tennessee, and I was with the FBI for 21 years, retired last year, and was fortunate enough to be the case agent on the Del Rio cockfighting ring in Northeast Tennessee. That was a 7-year FBI undercover investigation that centered around a corrupt sheriff's department. It brought people from Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, as far away as Maine, to participate in the Del Rio and the 440 pit, two separate pits there in that county. In the interest of brevity, I'll just say that the cockfighting operation was deeply entwined with police corruption. That was my specialty in my last 10 years with the FBI. And we have proven time and time again in these rural districts that one of the major problems that goes with the corrosive effect of long-term organized cockfighting businesses, and it is a business, it is a gambling business, it's not a sport, it's just a business. It's hugely profitable for the winners, and not so profitable if you don't get up into the big league. But the pit owners paid the sheriff, paid him $8,000 a year, as you know, by their own accounts. When they pled guilty, they agreed to that's what they did. But it still flourishes. The U.S. government seized the Del Rio pit, seized the 440 pit. It's not going on in Cocke County too much, and Cocke County, by the way, is spelled C-O-C-K-E. Nothing to do with fighting cocks as far as the name, although their high school is called the Fighting Cocks. But so it's that pit existed for 60 years. So, I mean, same place, 60 years. Corrosive effect on the local law enforcement. 155 people convicted of cockfighting crimes in that county for that particular search warrant. 8 officers went to prison, and 55 civilians went for various drug charges. But again, with what I'm doing now, I mostly go to Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and we're on the verge of starting into Georgia to investigate cockfighting pits. Sunset, which one of these gentlemen talked about, nice pit. It was legal up till last year, I think, in August. A fellow from Canton, North Carolina, won the world championship in 2008. I don't know if it was at that particular pit, but one of the Louisiana pits. He walked out of there with $400,000. Of course, Louisiana didn't see it, and the U.S. government didn't see a piece of it. It's not declared income. His handler got $50,000. Both of those fellows are from Canton, North Carolina. This year in Bayou Springs, Kentucky, right around the Memorial Day holiday, was the World Championship. It's held in, used to be Springbrook, now it's called Bayou Springs. That world champion defeated the seemingly undefeateable fellow from Canton, who won time and time again. But a fellow from the great state of Georgia is now the world champion, and he took his chickens in violation of federal law to Kentucky, fought him, won the world champion. Unfortunately, I was there, but I did not learn the payoff amount. I think it was probably substantially lower than Louisiana. That pit makes a lot of people nervous. It's been busted several times and has been busted since. But really, what I'm here to say is, your bill, and I'm in great support of closing your loophole. Don't sell short your law enforcement officers. You have some of the best law enforcement officers in this nation, and there's a lot of talk about innocent this and innocent that, and I agree that you need to craft your bill with the right language to minimize all that. But you know, there's there's investigations that go here. You know, you talk about intent. You know, the officers have to prove intent, and they'll investigate that intent. And they do that with videos, and they do that with audios, and they do that with interviews, and they do that with, are you going to this game foul show, but I just happen to have a couple of gaffs and knives with me. Well, that shows intent that you're going to fight them. If you are a game foul breeder, and you're a true game foul breeder, I do not investigate game foul breeders unless they sell them to fight them. And when one of our people calls up and says, I need some of your shufflers, how have they won? And he says, oh, my birds have won at this pit, this pit, this pit, and this pit. And you say, okay, I'll give you $1,200 for a brood trio, or $3,000 or $5,000 if they're coming out of Canton. For a brood trio, you're selling them with intent to fight. And if you're traveling around with intent to fight, and the officers stop you, or they catch you going somewhere. Now, these are not backyard get-together pits, and some of these instances of two roosters fighting, you need a handler, you need a referee, you need a marked pit. There's all kinds of rules. There's several rule books out. There's Mexican rules, there's American rules, there's Filipino rules, there's Puerto Rican rules, all over the place. The only place this is legal is in Guam, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa. Nowhere in the continental United States, no states have any portion of it legal. But long story short, what I'm saying is your loophole that all the other people have been talking about certainly needs to be closed. But don't lose sight of the fact that animal fighting, especially cockfighting, is a profitable gambling business. Supreme Court of Tennessee ruled in 1847 that it was gambling. It's not a sport, it's gambling. And it's been reaffirmed forever. There's been talk of the Abe Lincoln and the presidents and all this stuff. True or not true, I don't know. Probably true. But there's a lot of things in our heritage and our culture that we just don't do anymore. There were slaves in the White House. We certainly don't do that. One of the Jacksons, and my history's not good enough, one of the Jacksons certainly mistreated the Cherokee Indians when he marched them, a zillion leagues away from their home.
Mr. Ramsey.
I'll stop.
That's all right.
Thanks.
Is that you or me?
Mr. Cole. Sorry, Mr. Cole.
Mr. Chairman, I kind of put this question to you. I'm not debating that the actual cockfighting pit is, that's kind of obvious. I'm, in your wisdom, some of the issues we're debating is, the actual
spectator.
Well, I don't see it that way. I mean, we're talking about ownership, and who decides that? I mean, as you said, you don't investigate game fowl breeders.
No.
And as my esteemed seatmate said, if I had to pick, good resources, I'd want to bust up where 200 people were, not one guy out on a farm.
And that's usually what happens. I mean, this possession with intent of anything going, even if you say possession of a firearm with intent to commit a felony is a separate law, probably in Georgia. It's an intent issue. What is some of the elements of the crime that you have taken steps? Now, the spectator loophole, that was used very successfully by the cockfighters in Del Rio when I did my search warrant. 155 people there, 360-something roosters, and nobody was a participant. Everyone said, I'm just here spectating. And we said, so these birds flew in on their own, tied to razors, tied to gaffs and the knives to their own claws and fought, and they successfully avoided felony prosecution, except for the ones that we had actually on video, by saying, I'm a spectator. They paid their $50 spectator fine in Tennessee and went on.
It's going to be a very fact-specific analysis, Representative Cole. I mean, it's, every particular situation, law enforcement comes in, they do an investigation, they gather evidence, some is strong, some is not so strong. They go to the DA. The DA may go, or whoever the law enforcement authority is, depending on the type of charge you're talking about, misdemeanor or felony. They'll take a look at the evidence and, they'll move forward or they won't. I mean, there is a certain amount of prosecutorial discretion that bothers some people, but that also comforts some people as well. And that largely is also fact-specific, meaning that sometimes comes down to the DA. It may come down to the jurisdiction that you're talking about. It may come down to what history that particular individual has. Is this truly an accident? Is this a misunderstanding? Or is there something really going on? Those are just 3 questions. There are dozens of questions that go on in the investigation process, both in the pure investigation and then whether or not to go ahead and bring an indictment. And that goes, and that takes a long time. There are interviews that occur during that process. There are multiple interviews of multiple witnesses, and they go back 2, 3, 4, 5 times, depending on the severity of the charge. You know, on this, to talk about resources again, is this something that realistically, you know, local law enforcement, meaning the local prosecuting attorney, is going to go ahead and put a lot of time and energy into? As compared to other crimes? Probably not. As compared to other crimes? Probably not. But depending on the jurisdiction, if you're fortunate enough to have a police chief like the one from Garden City, who says, and I take him at his word, that if he gets a complaint, he gets information. If he has an information and belief about X, he's going to go investigate X. I don't have the faith, frankly, that that's actually the case throughout the state. I wish it were. I don't think it is. That's the long way of saying it's a fact-specific analysis, and it comes down sometimes to discretion, which is why when we have those portions of the statute, we want to make sure that we tailor the elements of the crime as neatly as we can in order to not cast too wide a net. We don't want it to be so narrow that it misses the intended conduct, but we don't want it to be so broad, have such breadth, that it goes ahead and catches conduct that clearly is not contemplated in the intent of the legislature.
And in my conclusion, I'll say you do have to, as Chairman very correctly said, if it's too broad, it's not going to pass constitutional muster. I mean, your own courts will strike it down as being too broad. But in Del Rio and in the Tennessee investigation, let me preface that about resources. Why did the FBI care about cockfighting? Why did the FBI do a cockfighting investigation? It did not. It did a police corruption gambling investigation of one of the elements happened to be cockfighting. It could have been cards, it could have been dogs, it could have been whatever. The corrosive effect of organized gambling year after year after year taking place in just over this line in Alabama towards Birmingham, that took place in Blue Ridge, where I think the mayor or somebody got caught up. The pit in Blood Mountain, the pit in Murphy, North Carolina, right over your state line. You know, I don't have my list of Georgia pits with me, but you know, do you have a cockfighting element here? Sure you do.
Let me make one comment in response, and this goes to the comment I made about law enforcement before. It isn't whether or not someone, the cause in my mind as to why certain situations will not be investigated with such vigorousness as others is not about lack of commitment on the part of law enforcement in any, whether it's local, statewide, or otherwise. It's a matter of resources, and I think the gentleman alluded to that. And in this day and age, I think we're all a little more sensitive about limited resources and what it is and the priorities and the attention that law enforcement, you know, focuses on. It's not because of lack of desire or lack of desire to fulfill one's duty. On the contrary, it's a matter of resources. Yes, Mrs. Cooper.
I'm concerned about one of those side issues. We're having a terrible problem with drugs in the state of Georgia. Up in the mountain area where you talked about they had one problem.
Mm-hmm.
But also, is it my understanding that drugs are coming now in across our borders from Mexico, and that is becoming a big thing with the Mexican big cartels of drug dealers, and that we had somebody say that one of the groups was attended mainly by Hispanics. Is this a trend we're seeing coming into the southern border states?
Yes, ma'am. I can't speak specifically to Georgia on this issue. I can speak to the fact that in the southeast of the United States, there are pits that host invitation-only cockfights to basically Mexican drug fugitives that come across the border. There's a breeder in North Carolina who flies his birds back and forth from North Mexico to North Carolina. Now, there's a lot of people that say, hey, that's an innocent thing. I have not investigated them. It's just kind of weird to take a twin-engine airplane and fly a couple of chickens over to fight. That's an awful expensive fight. But, you know, like I said, I didn't investigate that gentleman, so I don't know his intent. Some pits are drug-ridden, just horrible places. Other pits, such as the Del Rio pit, did not have as large a drug thing there. There are other pits. Laurel Creek, Kentucky. There's some drugs in there, but it's not a bad pit. Go to Brownsville, Kentucky. There's a sign on the wall that says "Kill that man on sight," with a crosshair on his picture. So it just depends on where you're at, what the trend is, who's running the pit, how violent are they, how much drugs will they allow, how they are in it. So it's just there's a lot of things that go along with any organized illegal activity, and that's all it is organized illegal activity.
Did you follow up or no? No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Farrell.
Thank you.
Ms. Jenny Hodges.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come and testify about this. First of all, I would like to say that the Constitution was written so as to restrain or police the government, not the populace. I think this is very obvious in the manner in which the amendments are put forth in our Bill of Rights. The right of the people peacefully to assemble, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. And then the Ninth Amendment, which I love the best, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. It concerns me that the origin of this bill was from a police chief who had no power to rule over his populace. The sheriff is the highest constitutional officer in the country. He can overrule the authority of president and or governor. In doing what? In preserving the Constitution, in policing the government so as not to infringe on the rights of the individual to life, liberty, and private property. An animal is private property. One of our complaints against King George in our Declaration of Independence was that he has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. There are three forms of government. There are family government, church government, and civil government. Atrocities in society should be addressed by those lawfully given that authority by God. Civil government has not been given the authority to dictate to us what we do to our private property or with our private property. It is for the community to come out against these types of atrocities. If you visit an abattoir, if you visit a dairy, cows are injected with hormones to the extent that their udders swell with pus from mastitis, such that we now have allowed our legislators to regulate the amount of pus allowed in the milk that we give our children to drink. Animal Planet entertains our offspring by showing them violent shows where lions devour innocent antelope. I wonder if DFAC should be called in to commit the violent atrocity of ripping the children away from their parents for witnessing such atrocities. Circumcision is considered very violent by some. To take your newly born son to a doctor, I chose a Jewish doctor for my 4 sons, and to have this foreskin cut off without any anesthetic, such that you then have to use gauze and Vaseline for a week to protect it, and the baby cries when you change these bandages, that's considered violent by some. But it is for the parent to decide how to parent and care for his offspring. And if the community wants to come out against it, that's one thing, but it certainly does not validate civil government. Some think it's violent to drop your child off to a government indoctrination program for 8 hours a day. I would certainly not condone civil government ripping my children away because I choose to dump them at a government indoctrination program. Vaccinating a child could be considered violent. I would consider prenatal murder rather violent, and I find it alarming that sheriffs are not in here arguing for legislation such that they can actually protect individual life and liberty. A sheriff, as the highest constitutional officer in the land, is unfit to serve and should be recalled and replaced with a citizen who understands constitutionally restrained government and understands private property. I recommend that this bill be amended such that the current language is struck and the act of confiscating private property in the form of animals or infringing on the right of the people to peacefully be assembled be criminalized, and a resolution be written urging that citizens' arrests take place for those officers who do not restrain government but instead police the people. Thank you.
let's try to refrain from outbursts if we could. Thank you. Mr. Ron Golden.
My name is Ron Golden, and I'm here on behalf of myself. I'll try not to reiterate too much of what Jenny's already said, although it's a message I think we need to hear. One of the things that I kept hearing is that this is a consensus issue. We need to remember that we're a republic, not a democracy. This is not mob rule. One group of people don't get to impose their will on another simply because they don't like the action. We have a right, and that right is unalienable. It means we can't take it away. It's not to be taken away by you or him or these people over here. Only when I infringe upon your right do you have the right to come back at me. I just don't see the efficacy in bringing this to the level of a felony. They claim that there's nothing in the law that allows them to prosecute spectators. That's not true. If we read the law as it's written right now, anyone who acts or omits an act, that means fails to act, where there is animal cruelty going on, they're guilty. That's what the law says now. Yeah, it's a misdemeanor. It's only a year in jail and $5,000. Let's make it a felony. I think they're trying to do an end-around run to eliminate gun rights. Now, you might think that's a stretch, but no more of a stretch than saying exposing a child to a cockfight is tantamount to Jeffrey Dahmer because he saw violence to an animal. We have football, boxing, ultimate fighting, and as Jenny pointed out, abortion. And yet we're sitting here worried about the rights of a rooster. What about the rights of the human lives that are impacted on the other end of this spectrum? We're not, there's no consideration for those people. They're suddenly a felony. They're a felon. They lose their rights because of a chicken. We consume 287,000 chickens a day in this country. All I'm saying is let's be realistic. That's all I've got to say.
All right, thank you. I think one thing
Sure.
You said, the first thing you said was this is a consensus issue. I think if there's one thing we've demonstrated, or that's been demonstrated to this panel this morning, is that this is not a consensus issue. So I mean,
right.
You know, we're here specifically on this bill in this forum because it isn't a consensus issue. So we're not sitting here agreeing or disagreeing. It's a hearing, and by virtue of being a hearing, we're hearing both sides. So
Sure.
I don't know what your predisposed notions are about what anyone at this table might feel about the issue, but they're probably not accurate.
No, and forgive me if I came across that way. I'm
Sorry.
a little nervous.
Please don't be.
But there's a lot to be said. And what I mean by consensus is we kept hearing that there's a consensus that cockfighting is illegal and abhorrent. I don't believe there is, because if that were the case, we wouldn't have people cockfighting, would we? Now, I'm not advocating it. I've never been to a cockfight, nor do I ever want to go to one. I wouldn't attend it, wouldn't do it myself. But that doesn't mean that I have the right to impose on someone else my beliefs. Where do we draw the line? At some point, you know, is it going to be religion? We've got that admonition in the Constitution, but we don't seem to follow that either. We're not following it here. We're not advocating for the rights of the individual. We're advocating for the rights of the rooster. And I just think it's ridiculous that we're putting the human element out in the back burner and putting a rooster in the forefront. We can use all kinds of justifications. I've heard money,
drugs, children, and guns. Those things are concurrent in society, whether we have cockfighting or not. Making it a felony is not going to get rid of it, and I think we already know that.
Mr. Setzler.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to follow one of your lines of reasoning here. The distinction you make about democracy versus republic, I mean, I don't think that should be lost on the committee. I want to make sure I understand your perspective. So you're saying, for example, if today there's consensus that if you own a snake, you can take a mouse and throw it at the snake for food, and there's consensus that that's okay. But I think by your reasoning, you're suggesting that if consensus in the United States shifted, that 80% of Americans said it's wrong to feed a mouse to a snake, that the line of logic the Humane Society is bringing is that because there's consensus, that then confers the whole legal status changes and consensus makes right versus the notion that republics exist to restrain government power, to preserve rights versus the consensus determining what's right by its will. Is that the point you're making?
Well, absolutely, and I think that's the purpose of law in general, and that's why our law is structured the way it is, so that we don't have the philosophical interference of the mob, the consensus, that this action is wrong, so we're going to outlaw it. That simply doesn't meet the standard.
So by that line of logic, then, if only 10% of Georgians opposed cockfighting and 90% supported cockfighting, cockfighting would be just and fair and moral in Georgia?
No, and I don't think you're bringing into the morality of whom? The rooster? I mean...
Well, again, to your point, I think the point you're making, as I hear it, is that consensus doesn't make right.
Correct.
That if 90% of Georgians supported cockfighting, it wouldn't make cockfighting right.
No.
Any more than the fact that 80% of Southerners supported slavery in the 1840s made slavery right. That consensus doesn't make right. Timeless truth makes right.
Exactly.
Wherever you believe that truth comes from, and that consensus doesn't make it right, that it really becomes an issue of property rights. And I'm understanding that's the point you're trying to make.
Correct. And I think we need to make the distinction between, the issue of slavery has come up a couple of times. I think we need to recognize that there's a distinct difference. In slavery, we were talking about human property. That's not even fathomable to me, to have human property. Here we're talking about a chicken. And we're putting the rights, or alleged or supposed or presumed rights, of a chicken ahead of a human being.
Mrs. Cooper.
I'd like to clarify another thing in your testimony. I mean, we are a republic, and we are given the right as elected officials to make the decisions about the laws of the state of Georgia under the Constitution of Georgia.
Absolutely.
And so we do have that right to make the laws. And as elected officials, we need to look at all aspects. I'm not personally looking at it just because it's a chicken to give it right, but there's all sorts of other things related to it. And a decision on my vote will be made at looking at the whole picture, not just the fact that it's a chicken. And I think for you to put it that way, it is a misrepresentation of that. The other thing is to say that we don't look at other things. I think Representative Setzler is one of the biggest proponents on, preventing abortions. I work hard to prevent domestic violence. We are concerned here. You're looking at one little narrow law, and before you make a broad statement like that, you ought to look at all the different things that we do advocate down here for humans.
I have.
Mr. Golden, thank you very much for taking the time to be down here. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. This is one of those situations where you look at someone's last name and you're just going to give it your best shot. Dino Vlachos? Is that right?
Several years of this. Thank you.
You wrote it very quickly. Was that correct, or did I?
No, that actually is pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we have
thank you
people
for your patience.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate
Thanks.
it. You're the final witness, and thank you for being here. You have the floor.
Thank you for your time. I just wanted to make a couple of points. I think the law actually would help law enforcement because it articulates a standard by which law enforcement then can prosecute these laws. Second thing is that when we worked on the felony cruelty bill, when we worked on the dogfighting bill, both in its original form and then to strengthen it, we heard the same arguments about people that had two dogs that got in a fight in their backyard were going to be prosecuted. That's never happened. And I can tell you that, again, all of the arguments that we've heard today against this, we heard against previous bills. They've heard it in 50 other states. There's not been this outbreak of innocent people, of bystanders, being arrested and charged with felonies. It just hasn't happened. The third thing I'd like to talk about is I think it's ridiculous to reduce dogfighting and cockfighting to freedom of assembly by the Constitution. Absolutely absurd. And you can actually extrapolate off of that to the rest of that argument. It is unfortunate that animals are considered property and thus are minimized by the law. But it would seem like in this year, after everything we've heard about animal fighting, with the Michael Vick case, with the case in Florida where the guy got 205 years for the vicious, notorious ring that he was running, you'd think that we could have said, as a civilization, we've evolved just a little bit to maybe extend ethical treatment, compassionate treatment to all of God's creatures. But again, as long as you're making, I think they quoted, I think the industry is a $10 million industry in the state of Georgia for raising cockfight or game birds. As long as the guy's walking away with $400,000 in prizes in Louisiana, as long as the guy from Canton, North Carolina, is benefiting from it. Unfortunately, it tends to minimize that. But what I would say, please consider not only the legal implications, but also the ethical implications. Thank you.
Mr. Sessler, please refrain from applause. Mr. Sessler.
Sir, you said it was unfortunate that we consider animals property. Could you be real specific in what status you'd like to give animals?
Well, I would like to give them a status of being able to live their lives free of pain and suffering, of externally and superficially created pain and suffering, like cockfighting and dogfighting. I mean, again, if you look at the pictures that came out after the Michael Vick case, and you look at the animals that had half their faces ripped off, actually jawbones exposed. I mean, that's what I'm saying, that they should be given more than just, they should be considered more than just property, but given the right to live their lives free of pain and suffering.
Do you consider living in a chicken house a life of pain and suffering, or would you consider that a humane handling of a chicken?
Well, again, I've never been to a chicken house. I've seen pictures of it. I've seen cases where people in chicken houses have been prosecuted for animal cruelty. I've seen pictures of people in chicken houses taking a chicken by its hind legs and beating it against a wall. So from the isolated incidents I've seen, it doesn't look like it's a day in the park. But again, I can't speak to the rest of it because I don't know.
Sir, are you a vegetarian?
I am.
Mr. Franklin.
Thank you. You had indicated that that you would like to see ethical and humane treatment of all God's creatures. Did I understand that right?
That's correct.
What is your view of abortion?
I don't see what it has to do with it, but I'm against it.
Well, I appreciate that.
Sure.
You heard someone else testify that didn't see anything wrong with boxing because that was voluntary.
Absolutely.
You have the same view of boxing?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got two adults, a free will, going in for economic purposes. Again, those chickens, those dogs don't go in there voluntarily. They aren't, again, strapping those razors onto their own legs. Mm-hmm. The dogs aren't going through all the steroid injections and all of the inhumane treatment that goes with that.
Would you support legislation and come and testify on its behalf if you have opportunity to recognize the crime of abortion in the state?
Sure.
All right.
Yes, if that's what you want. But again, will you pass this legislation as it stands?
Well, this is not a bargain for exchange.
Okay.
We'll move on.
Yeah,
Mrs.
my
Cooper.
testimony is contingent upon him passing
Mrs. Cooper.
109.
I'd like to go back to the statement, and it's following up a little bit with Representative Setzler, that, our job is to find balance on these. And it certainly doesn't help your cause, when we have somebody that's a czar in the White House that wants to give animals legal rights, and we talk about property rights and what we're doing and gun rights, I mean, there is a line over lower forms on this planet. I mean, and you're a vegetarian, and I respect that, but I also believe that God created animals, and there's a reason that to eat and so forth, and it's very hard for us when people are so extreme. And one of the problems you're running into in getting things through our legislature is because there are people putting out there things like, that they want to do away with hunting and give animals the right to have legal representation and that kind of thing. And there's a balance, and we have to look for that balance, and sometimes both sides hurt their causes.
Well, I'm sorry if I hurt this. I'm sorry. That was not my intent. But again, we are not looking to ban hunting, and we're not looking to give animals legal rights. We're just asking that they be protected under the law.
Thank you for taking the time to come down here this morning. This, it's very easy, and we'll wind up. We're just about ready to wind up. It's very easy on the surface to take a look at something like this having to do with cockfighting and to snicker about it. And I'm sure some of the chattering class have done that, and we'll do that in the future. But when you take a look at the issue, it's actually a very serious one because it does impact property rights. It does impact, or the perception of property rights, at least, if not more so. It impacts, obviously, our criminal code. It impacts certain people's livelihoods. And those are three major areas that we need to step very carefully on. So with that in mind, to the extent that interested parties, including the proponent of the bill, the author of the bill, I should say, has heard some of the concerns, and I think they're very legitimate concerns about the bill, would communicate with opponents of the bill, and I would request that opponents of the bill, hopefully, or would hope anyway, that opponents of the bill have heard some of the concerns of the proponents of the bill. And the biggest thing that sticks out in my mind there is that if there's really otherwise innocent conduct going on, if there really is otherwise innocent conduct occurring under the laws of our state as it stands right now, you may not like the laws of our state right now, but the laws of our state are what they are. If there's truly innocent conduct occurring right now, then there really should be no reason why opponents couldn't get together with the author and tailor some very narrow language that gets to the issue without being, as we talked about before, so broad to ensnare otherwise truly innocent conduct. I don't pretend to understand this issue much more than most people in this room do, but I do know that it hits on those three major areas that I just mentioned, and I would encourage that communication. So, with that, thank you for coming down this morning. Now this afternoon, we're just about on time, miraculously. Thank you. We're adjourned.